check.
Mic check. Oh, it's mic drop.
Yeah, mic drop by BTS.
By BTS.
Mic drop by BTS. Do I look fantastic or do I look Phantasma?
Well, you don't look like that shitty ass book.
Oh. What's up, everyone? My name is Connor, and welcome to my channel where I read and talk about books with completely arbitrary magic systems and female main characters who are so deeply unlikable that I spent the entire book rooting for the villains. Recently, I did my very first poll where I let my viewers pick which book I do a deep dive of from my extensive and somewhat daunting TBR list. I often get really bad decision paralysis, and when faced with all of the cursed books on said list, it can be a little bit difficult to really commit myself to any of them. So now my audience gets to have a hand in what tortures I subject myself to, and that actually does take some of the pressure off, because if I had a bad time with it, I can just blame you guys. And just like the main character blaming everyone but herself for her bad choices, I will be blaming all of you for having read this piece of garbage that is Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. But before I do begin, I just want to put out the disclaimer that this video is simply me talking about my personal thoughts and opinions on the book. This video is not meant for the author or anyone close to the author or any of her superfans. If you did actually really like this book, that's totally fine. You're allowed to have different opinions from me. I always try to give my viewers warning ahead of time that I don't have great things to say about certain books, and you know, if you can't handle criticisms against things that you like or other people having opinions that don't align with your own, this video probably isn't for you, and it's okay to click that little X in the top corner and just close out of it. I'll be the first to admit, I don't particularly enjoy seeing criticisms of things that I do really enjoy, but I make the decision to not engage with those things if I think that it's gonna upset me. I'd rather you protect your peace instead of getting worked up over what some opinionated twink on the internet has to say. It's okay to look at something and go, this is probably gonna piss me off, so I'm not gonna engage with it. Trust me when I say that as soon as you learn to do that, your life is gonna be so much easier. And now that we've got that mini therapy session out of the way, let's get ahead and jump right into Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. Welcome to Phantasma. There are only two rules to the game: stay alive and don't fall in love. When Ophelia's sister disappears, there's only one way to save her. Ophelia must enter Phantasma, a deadly contest inside a haunted mansion. And claim its prize, a single wish. Phantasma is a maze of twisting corridors and lavish ballrooms, of demons and temptations. Ophelia will face 9 challenges, each more dangerous than the last. There can only be one winner, and the other contestants will stop at nothing to eliminate their rivals. Every day, the house creates new monsters, but just as Ophelia's fears threaten to overwhelm her, a mysterious stranger offers her a bargain. Charming, arrogant, and infuriatingly attractive, Blackwell claims he can guide her through the lethal trials ahead. All he asks in return is 10 years of her life. Ophelia knows she shouldn't trust him. Blackwell doesn't seem dangerous, but appearances can be deceptive. Worse still, she feels a dark and irresistible attraction, drawing them closer and closer. Her life is on the line, but in Phantasma, the only thing deadlier than losing the game is losing your heart. I did not come prepared. First thing on the roster is the content and trigger warnings. Now, someone in my previous video actually said that apparently Amazon is kind of weird about putting certain words or content warnings too early into the book. I have never heard about this until that moment. I don't know if this is true. I am taking the commenter at face value. If that is the reason why authors don't put their content warnings in the beginning of their book and redirect readers to their websites with more in-depth content warnings. If that is the case, I think that that's just really backwards, because I've seen content warnings put in the summary of the book on the actual Amazon page, and put the content warning for sexual assault in the actual summary, but that's not allowed to be within the first couple pages of the book. So this isn't a complaint against the author herself, who did include a link to her website with a more comprehensive list. I just personally hate the idea of having to go searching for content warnings on like other locations that are not just stated in the book. I shouldn't have to go on some kind of hunt to find out whether or not a book is actually going to include something that I don't want to see in it. So that is the case for this book, but I'm not gonna rag on the author for not including like the full content warnings, because if what my commenter says is if what that commenter said is true, like I fully understand that. This is mostly just like a major criticism directed towards Amazon. It's stupid. Why does it matter? Why does it matter if someone puts sexual assault as a content warning in like the first few pages of their book? Whatever. On the actual website, the full content warnings include elements of horror that include gruesome descriptions of gore, torture, death, and lots of blood. Mentions of deaths of family members, suicide, depression, corpses, and assault also occur. The work contains a heavy emphasis on OCD and OCD tics, as well as intrusive thoughts, accidental self-mutilation, and heavy compulsions. There is explicit sexual content, including sexual acts in blood. That scene was goofy. One scene shows the main character having a drink that is magically drugged, and dubious consent occurs, but never with the love interest. All sexual acts with the love interest are explicitly consensual, as well as a scene with heavy alcohol use. I will say that this is a very good list of, like, you know, detailed listings of all of the things within the book that could be considered content warnings, could be upsetting for some readers. I personally did not think that anything was like too egregious, but I do appreciate the author, like, you know, covering all of her bases. It is just really unfortunate that she wasn't able to just include that whole paragraph in the book and not just on her website. There is a little bit of a hierarchy within the book that I just want to go over real quick, of like paranormal beings, because like they do kind of sort of show up. Usually it's just like a one-time thing that pops up, but like it is included in the hierarchy. So we'll just get this out of the way really quickly. So the hierarchy of paranormal beings are King of the Devils, Prince of the Devils, Devils, and then underneath devils are demons, and they're described as offspring of a devil and another paranormal being. And then beneath demons are wraiths, which is offspring of a demon and another paranormal being. Underneath wraiths are immortal and mortal paranormal beings. So the immortal paranormal beings are vampires, shapeshifters, familiars, and ghosts. The mortal paranormal beings are necromancers, seers, witches, and specters. So the classification of ghosts are phantoms, which are the most corporeal and powerful type of ghosts. It also explains in the book, this isn't stated in the hierarchy, explains in the book that phantoms are ghosts of immortal, excuse me, of immortal paranormal beings. Even though the concept of being immortal suggests that you can't die, it's a little goofy, but you know, we're not gonna spend too much time dwelling on it. Poltergeists, which are a type of ghost able to possess the corporeal vessel of another being. It also doesn't say right here, but in the book, it says that poltergeists are ghosts of devils who have died, and they specifically try to possess you in order to resurrect their devil body that, like, had previously died, something like that. Apparitions, which are the most common type of ghost, completely non-corporeal, and if left lingering on any corporeal plane for too long without crossing over, can deteriorate into a ghoul. And ghouls are apparitions that have deteriorated into a numb, mindless entity. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can officially jump into the story. So we open with our main character, Ophelia, who has just discovered her mother's corpse, and she needs to very quickly perform a ritual in order to inherit her family's necromantic magic before her window of opportunity closes and, like, I guess her mother's spirit and the magic cross over to the other side. Honestly, like, 2 pages into this book, and I could not take the writing seriously. At least for the first chapter or the prologue or whatever, it felt so heavy-handed, and it was trying way too hard to set this dark and edgy atmosphere to the point of being kind of goofy. Ophelia had been vaguely aware of her sister padding down the creaky stairs after her, but had been too busy scouring her memories to warn Genevieve of the gruesome scenes below. Ophelia flipped through her recollection for confirmation that she had knocked on her headboard enough times and tapped her knuckles in the correct pattern on her wall before she went to sleep. I get not wanting to use memories twice in one paragraph, but flipped through her recollection for confirmation? Kaylee, put the thesaurus down. Ophelia replayed the events in her head. There, I fixed it for you. So after Ophelia performs this ritual, her eyes suddenly change color. Ophelia caught a glimpse of her reflection flickering in the window. Her dark hair and wispy nightgown were caked in blood. Crimson was smeared across her razor-sharp cheekbones and dripping over the bridge of her delicately pointed nose, a startling contrast against her porcelain skin. That wasn't what caught her attention, however, not when the gaze staring back at her was no longer her own. Her irises no longer the bright, warm cerulean of her childhood, the color Genevieve's still were. Instead, they had changed to a haunting, icy hue, almost bleached of their pigment entirely. Let's ease up on the adjectives there, girly pop. There was also another issue that I had reading this book. Everyone's eyes are described as cerulean, viridian, emerald, just over the top. Like, just say blue and green eyes. It's okay. It's okay to just say the standard color. Especially because, like, they'll use different descriptors, like for Blackwell's eyes, instead of just saying, like, it does sometimes say green, but then it'll also say viridian and then emerald. And I don't know, I feel like viridian and emerald, those are two different shades of green. I found it kind of weird that it just kind of cycled through all these different descriptors of green, but then also still used the word green. It's annoying. I think it's really annoying when books put like this much emphasis on like creative eye colors. It's so overdone. I really don't even know what to say about the first chapter. It just felt like it was trying way too hard to be flowery, and I struggled to really follow along with the prose and understand what was going on. This is not a dig at people who are into flowery and purple prose. For me personally, I think that it works best when used sparingly, because after a certain point, it just starts to feel like a waste of time when there's a cleaner and more efficient way of getting your point across that doesn't make you look like a high schooler who just learned a bunch of new fancy words. At the end of this ritual, Ophelia takes a locket off of her mother's body and it suddenly starts pulsing. It will randomly pulse throughout important story beats, but we don't learn its deal for a really long time. Just remember that it's there and it pulses, and it typically means that she's like going in the right direction, or like when Blackwell is nearby, it pulses, so that like tells you that, oh, it's important for him to be present. In the next chapter, it explains that Ophelia comes from a prolific family of necromancers who live in New Orleans. It explains how she has OCD, and that manifests as what's referred to as the shadow voice in her head, who gives her compulsions, and if she doesn't follow them, it tells her things like how her family will die. Now, I personally don't know enough about OCD as a mental health condition outside of the stereotypical stuff that you often see in media. I'm not going to comment on how OCD is portrayed within this story in particular, simply because I don't feel like I'm well informed enough to criticize or praise how it's written. But if any of you do have OCD, or like have experience with people who have OCD and have read this book, please let me know in the comments whether or not it's an accurate or sensitive portrayal of the disorder, because I am genuinely curious to know how others received it. Especially because I see often in dark fiction and dark romance specifically, it can toe the line of portraying mental illness in a really gross and insensitive way, because rather than writing it with any nuance, it's just kind of sensationalized in a way to try to make the setting seem more dark and gritty. I've seen a lot of examples of authors who use insanity and psychopathy for shock value and to try and make their story seem really edgy without any actual research, care, or consideration for how those very real mental illnesses actually look like for real life people who struggle with them. Take literally anything written by Jasmine Moss, for example. I did see a little note from the author talking about her own experiences with OCD, so perhaps the way it's portrayed is coming from, like, you know, her own lived experiences. And if that is the case, I will say that Ophelia's OCD is one of the only things that I actually found interesting about this book. Back into the story, it talks about how Ophelia has a lot on her shoulders as far as upholding her family legacy. I guess necromancy is more of a well-known thing that's practiced because her grandmother and mother more or less capitalized on their magic by taking all kinds of jobs and requests from anyone who had the money to pay, and seemingly have built a small empire around around their practice that Ophelia doesn't feel like she's skilled enough to uphold. It talks about how she never felt like she was enough for her mother as the eldest, forced to learn the magic, while her younger sister got to have all the freedom. And I mean, if you ask me, just coming from, I guess, like a business standpoint, that's not a very smart move. If your family legacy is truly that important, what if something happened to your eldest daughter, like your heir, and you couldn't bring her back in time before her spirit passes on? Now you're just left with like your secondborn who knows bunk about necromancy because you put all of your eggs in one basket and didn't think to give both of your children the same education. Anyway, Ophelia clearly suffers from eldest daughter syndrome, which is the only time I felt any kind of like sympathy or empathy for this character in the book. Eldest child and eldest daughter syndrome is so real. I am personally the youngest of four, so I don't know how that feels, but Soren is the firstborn and he can absolutely attest to that. It's not great having all the expectations. It's not great having all the expectations of your family on you while your younger siblings just kind of get a free pass to do whatever they want. Strangely enough, I didn't hate the second chapter. I feel like the writing was fine. It was just kind of like a standard setup for Ophelia's background, like what kind of character she is. She's just a woman who has inherited a legacy too soon and has grown up with a bit of a complex because she's never been able to meet expectations while also suffering from a mental illness that her family couldn't just magic away because it's not ghostly or demonic possession, it's literally just how her brain is wired. It wasn't over the top goofy like chapter 1 was, and I feel like I kind of noticed that throughout the book. Like every once in a while the writing would get really goofy like chapter 1 and then the candle went out. And what was I saying? Like for the most part the writing was fine. Every once in a while it would suddenly start like really just abusing the thesaurus and trying to use like over the top flowery prose, but then other times it was just like, yeah, it's just kind of like normal standard writing. So it was a little weird. I will say, however, a big complaint I had was the overuse of the word insidious in this book. Literally every time something spooky happens or like the atmosphere gets kind of dark, it is described as being insidious. And as much as I complained about the author overusing the thesaurus in this book, I feel like that is the case where she should have looked up other words similar to insidious that she could interchange, because it just everything in this book is insidious, and I got pretty tired of reading that word. So while they're in town, Ophelia starts seeing apparitions, and Genevieve has a moment where she's kind of acting suspicious and clearly keeping something from Ophelia, but of course Ophelia doesn't actually think anything of it because it's not a romance if the female main character doesn't ask really basic and obvious questions. Next to her, Genevieve suddenly shivered, turning to glance over her shoulder with a strange look in her eyes. "What is it?" Ophelia pressed. Genevieve hesitated. "Something one of my friends said earlier about..." She shook her head. "Never mind. Let's just get home. I'm cold." Yeah, all I'm saying is if I came from a very prolific family of necromancers and was sensing weird magic going on in my area and someone in my family did this, I'd be like, no girl, you're gonna tell me what that person said and what you just saw. Like, I would be trying to get to the bottom of it right away. Like, I make jokes all the time that I'm not a stereotypical white person. Like, I get very superstitious. I'm not one of those idiots who goes like messing around with potentially supernatural things. I like being alive. I mean, I don't like being alive, but I want to stay alive. And so when it comes to stuff like this, I'm not just gonna brush it aside as if it's nothing. I'm gonna like, maybe this is something that needs to be addressed. But Ophelia just sees this interaction and is like, sure, let's get a carriage, and does not question her behavior any further. The very next morning, two men from the bank show up and tell Ophelia and Genevieve that they need to come with them to settle some paperwork regarding their finances because according to them, their mother took out some pretty hefty loans, and Genevieve immediately starts acting shady. She tries to convince Ophelia to go back to bed while she goes and handles everything at the bank alone, but the banker is like, actually, you both have to be present because you're both equal shareholders of the will in the house. So the banker reveals that their mother took out a loan of $35,000 with interest and only paid off $5,000 before she stopped making the payments 2 months prior. So now their house is being foreclosed, and if they can't pay back the money within the next month, the bank will take their property. He shows them carbon copies of the checks written by their mother, but only 3 of them were signed by Tessie Grimm. The other two Ophelia notices are forgeries because there's something slightly off about the signature. And meanwhile, Genevieve is acting like one of those dogs who refuse to look you in the eye when they get caught doing something wrong. They then get into this huge fight because Genevieve just wants her to sign away the property right away and just kind of like leave town and go live their own lives. But she refuses to tell Ophelia where she had been getting the money to pay off the mother's debt. That, like, it doesn't really go into that. Like, apparently she knew about the debt and tried to help pay it off, but obviously payments stopped 2 months ago, so even she couldn't keep up with it. Anyway, we find out that people have been keeping secrets from Ophelia. They get into it, Genevieve runs off down an alley, and when Ophelia tries to chase after her, she just vanishes. After some time wandering around the city looking for her, Ophelia just assumes that she caught a carriage home and decides to head back herself. On her way back, she overhears two people talking about some attraction, and they specifically say 27 people died during the last competition. That's the most casualties in the last 2 decades. Then she sees a flyer for Phantasma, the Devil's Manor, and immediately follows it up with this. It couldn't be true. The Devil's Manor was just a rumor, a source of entertainment to fuel a media frenzy and sell more papers. But the conversation between Mr. Mouton and Mr. Lafitte, I think that's how you say those names, in the car suddenly made sense. This right here, I found really hard to believe that in a world where the supernatural exists, devils exist, and she's supposedly received a very extensive education regarding devils and demons and ghosts and literally everything supernatural. The idea of the Devil's Manor just being a rumor is suddenly where she draws the line. How is it possible that she's laboring under the delusion that this place is just a rumor that the newspaper just so happens to be reporting on regularly, and other people around town, like degular humans, not supernatural, talk about it and know like the exact statistics of people who like enter and die and how often it's held? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense with like all the evidence that's presented to us that like indicates in this world that this manor exists, and she's like, it's just a rumor. It's not real. Even though it's like, it's called the Devil's Manor. Devils exist. You know this. I know that she's supposed to be sheltered because she like stayed inside studying necromancy her whole life, but correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't a famous family of necromancers know about a clearly supernatural house where large numbers of people go in and die constantly? Personally, I feel like that's something that would have been brought to their attention sooner, seeing as how they deal in the supernatural and death. But apparently everyone and their dog and their grandmother in town knows about this place except for Ophelia. It didn't make any sense. I don't know why it had to portray it as a rumor. Like, she could have recognized it and be like, oh, yes, I've heard of this before, and just left it at that. It's almost like if I said that Six Flags wasn't real just because I personally have never been there. No, it's still, like, a lot of people know about its existence, just like a lot of people know about Phantasma's existence, so I don't know why she was so insistent on not believing that it was real. Ophelia thinks that she sees a ghost while walking home and goes to follow it, but then gets lost in some mist. She then starts hearing the voice of someone she can't see, but you can only assume that it's the love interest because his presence gives her goosebumps and apparently makes her nipples hard just by being in her proximity. Like, that is genuinely a line in the book, like, her nipples got hard, and I'm like, was that really necessary? Who are you? You look so familiar. Well, I can't see you, so I'm unable to help with any insight on the familiarity front. Too bad. You're really missing out on my extraordinarily handsome phase. Yeah, this is obviously the love interest. So Ophelia realizes that she's at the Devil's Manor and not the old cathedral like she thought, and the weird voice gets all cryptic and she leaves. Ophelia does manage to get home and she goes to Genevieve's room to try, like, her door. She doesn't go into the room, she just goes to the door to try and talk to her. But this goofy bitch just assumes that she's ignoring her, even though there's literally zero sign that she ever actually made it home, and then she just decides to go to bed. Yeah, because when my sister disappears into the city and I can't find her, and there's no evidence that I can see that she ever made it home, my immediate thought is to take a bath and go to sleep and not actually confirm whether or not she got home safely. It is so dangerous for young women and AFAB people to be traveling alone, and they go missing on the streets every single day. I personally would not be able to rest if I didn't bust down the door to confirm that my sister was actually in her room and did not disappear on the streets when I couldn't find her. Ophelia, I fear, is an idiot. It's not until the very next day that Ophelia finally realizes that her sister is gone, because she finds a note that was left in the library saying that she's gonna handle everything with the foreclosure on the house and that she will be back in 2 weeks. Ophelia then goes to Genevieve's room and starts tearing it apart, and she ends up finding a diary with clippings about Phantasma over the years, as well as talking about how she stumbled onto something that her mother was keeping a secret and trying to find someone named Gabriel. Ophelia concludes that Genevieve has gone to Phantasma to enter the contest, so she decides to enter Phantasma to look for her sister. So Phantasma takes place over 9 days. The rules are that at any point she can forfeit, except for during the actual trials, which start at sunset every evening. So she's told that the price to enter is her greatest fear, and a devil named Jasper uses magic to dig through her mind and locate her biggest fear. It doesn't say what it is, but just that, like, he alludes to it being, like, I guess a really juicy fear, and it's gonna make the competition, like, really interesting. He also tells her to fall in love at her own risk. And you'd think that would be a really weird stipulation when entering a nightmare mansion, but apparently a lot of people meet each other and fall in love during these trials. There's, like, at least 3 separate occasions love has budded within Phantasma. And I thought that was pretty funny. Nothing says romance like fighting for your life in a ghost house that's trying to kill you 24/7. So Genevieve is not in Ophelia's group, but there are 9 other groups of contestants throughout the mansion, so she is still hoping that she might be there, and she just hasn't run into her yet. She meets a girl named Lucy who tries to be friendly and introduce herself, but Ophelia is immediately like, don't talk to me, and walks away from her. It was really funny because up until this point, the book has highlighted how lonely and isolated Ophelia is, but the one time someone tries to make nice, she's like, I'm not here to make friends. Like, girl, be so for real. Boo-hoo, I'm such a wallflower, and my sister makes friends so easily, and no one wants to talk to me because I'm the weird necromancer girl. No, I think the reason that you have no friends is because you act like this.
Robin.
Hey, Goop, what's up? Cool binder.
Hey, Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
In her room, she manages to stumble upon a secret passageway and then follows a ghost cat into said passageway. And as she's walking down this dark corridor, she suddenly gets chased down by some monster. We don't know what it looks like, just that it's got red eyes and claws. She barely manages to fight this thing off because when it attacks her, her pent-up magic suddenly bursts out and harms it. That's another thing. 67 pages into this book, I have no idea how necromancy works. Aside from the ritual where she took her mother's magic, Ophelia has done like 0 magic, 0 spellcasting, has not really talked about necromancy outside of being able to see ghosts. After she inherited the magic, it briefly explained that if you don't use the magic, it starts to build up and you need to expel it. And then at one point while she was running to her home, she fell and then sparks flew from her hands. But aside from those brief moments, this book has told us nothing about the magic system and how it works in this world. So I can't remember, when I first read this, I thought that it was her bedroom, but I think she just ended up in a completely separate room, and I just thought that it was her bedroom. But she ends up in some room, bedroom or otherwise, and then finds another secret door that leads back into the main corridor. But when she turns back to the room after checking out the corridor, it's suddenly a broom closet. So already weird things are happening and her sanity is being questioned. I did think that that bit was kind of interesting, aside from my complaint about just the complete lack of understanding around Ophelia's magic. I do think that the scene was kind of like a nice little jump scare.
You seen her pictures? I said, jump scare.
Ophelia yanked and prodded at the magic gateway for nearly 10 minutes before she decided to give up. She had no doubt that her right shoulder would be purple by sunrise, having jammed it against the solid wood to make it budge. So this I thought was funny because when Ophelia was being chased by the monster in the corridor, she slammed into a wall so hard that her nose started gushing blood. And then when this creature grabbed her, its nails ripped into her forearms. Like, that was the book's exact words. But for some reason, that was completely ignored, and she chose to focus on her slightly bruised shoulder. Ma'am, you are bleeding, but okay. She's suddenly approached by some guy in the corridor, and he immediately talks about how handsome he is, and that's how you, the reader, know that he is the stranger that spoke to her in the mist the night before, but he doesn't seem to remember their first meeting, even though she immediately recognizes, well, not recognizes his face, but just like his energy. Something that is interesting about this guy is that he's a ghost, but instead of the blue glow of apparitions, he's got a white glow and is as corporeal as a regular person. It's not until this guy points it out that she remembers that she was just bleeding from like a smashed nose and torn up arm. And I'm not saying that it's impossible for someone to forget that they've been bleeding all over their face and chest and clothes, but for me, dried blood is such an unpleasant feeling and smell that there is no way that I couldn't notice. For me, that kind of thing is such a sensory nightmare. The newly flowing magic in her veins had healing properties. Her arm was already beginning to scab. From what her mother had taught her, it would take her a quarter of the time to heal than normal mortals, and she didn't need to worry about infections anymore. Okay, so apparently her necromancer magic gives her super healing powers, and she apparently never gets sick. How does enhanced healing tie into death magic? We don't know. I could understand healing magic as far as like sapping other people's life force. That's when I think of necromancy, that's what I think of. But like necromancy magic doesn't just automatically heal you on its own. Like you have to siphon that energy typically from another living being. Like that's kind of the basis of necromantic magic. Also, I just felt like this little bit of super healing, that is such a cop-out because I just feel like it makes the stakes so much lower than if Ophelia was going through these trials with injuries like a torn up shoulder and a bruised face. I personally want to see more books where characters get injured and actually have to go through events and trials while actively hindered by their injuries. And on top of that, I also want to see more books where a character gets injured and they continue to experience chronic pain after said injury heals. As someone who suffers from chronic pain like almost on a daily basis from an injury I sustained over a year ago, I feel like I notice more often how in media characters who get injured heal quickly or just aren't hindered by their active injuries the way that they should be. And in my opinion, vague necromancy magic isn't exactly a good excuse for just instantly healing your main character. I would have accepted it if she actually cast a spell or did a ritual that did heal her as needed, because it at least shows that she is actually utilizing her magic, but instead it's just kind of like this passive side effect of her magic that she doesn't even have to think about, and it just automatically heals her. At that point, it's like, I no longer care if she gets hurt at any point, because she'll just be able to instantly heal without putting any effort into it, and so there isn't any real danger within the book. Getting back on track, the conversation with the stranger in the corridor, and she insists that they've met before because, and I quote, "All ghosts have their own energy, like a fingerprint, and yours is even more distinct than most. I've never come across anything like it before." And when she says that, he reveals that that's because he's a phantom. Phantom, that was it. No wonder he was so solid. I found this really funny because supposedly Ophelia has spent her entire life shut in the Grim Manor being trained in necromancy, but for some reason she was unable to distinguish and identify different types of ghosts other than just your standard apparitions. Apparitions were regular mortal souls that had died but not passed over to the other side, completely non-corporeal and intangible by anything except each other and of course necromancers. The worst type of ghost, according to her mother, were the ghouls. Apparitions that had stayed too long without crossing over, becoming zombie-like creatures as their ghostly energies began to fuse with that of this corporeal plane, making them strong enough to be semi-solid, but also becoming mindless in the process. A horrible combination to have power and no sense of morality. And she was beginning to wonder if that was exactly the sort of creature she had encountered in the secret corridor. So you're telling me that this woman who has spent her entire life being schooled on ghosts and death magic and anything supernatural walks into a manor filled with ghosts that make themselves known to all of the contestants, and she cannot recognize phantoms and ghouls until someone else points it out to her? She conveniently just loses all memory of her years and years of training and education until this guy reveals what he is, and then suddenly she begins to wonder if perhaps the thing that attacked her may or may not have been a ghoul. Listen, If you, as the author, are planning to reveal pertinent information to both the main character and the reader at the same time, don't make that information something that the main character is supposed to be an expert on. Poltergeists and phantoms, however, were the rarest of the ghostly paranormal beings, the most powerful. So she does seem to know what a phantom is, yet somehow I'm supposed to believe that she was never trained in how to recognize them. So this guy says that he can't remember her because his memories are really complicated. He can only remember essentially just his time within the manor while the actual trials are going on. And he also asks how she was able to summon the door that she just came from. And she's like, what do you mean summon? It just appeared. Okay, so I guess we can mark down blue sparks, super healing, and traveling from one space to another through interdimensional doorways as things that necromancers can do. Except that wasn't something that she seemed to be aware of that she was doing, and also it didn't at any point mention if traveling through doorways was specific to necromantic magic. So I don't know. Nothing is ever explained. Nothing is ever explained about the magic in any meaningful way. We never get any like clear, detailed outlines of how the magic works, like what does and doesn't consist of necromantic magic. The magic system in this book is a fucking mess, and I hated it. Before she could form a response, a piercing shriek rang out through the hall. Genevieve, she called, pushing past the stranger, heart pounding at the sound of her sister's voice. When she turned back to ask if the scream had been real, she found that the stranger and the cat had disappeared. You want to know what she does immediately after hearing her sister's scream? Obviously, you'd think her next move is to follow the source of the scream that she just heard to look for her missing sister that she came here to find, correct? Except she doesn't do that. As Ophelia made her way back to her room, she kept wondering if the scream she'd heard had really been Genevieve, or if it was just another trick the house was playing on her. It occurred to her, of course, that her own mind might have been the one playing the trick. At this point, I was beginning to think that Ophelia doesn't actually care about her sister. First, she never confirms whether or not Genevieve actually made it home safely after running off and disappearing into town by herself. And now she hears a scream that she can identify as her sister's, and instead of investigating, putting any effort into searching for her, she's just like, I wonder if I'm hallucinating. It's even funnier because after all of that happens, she takes a bath and immediately starts gooning over the phantom that she just met in the hall. She wondered what it would be like to have that mouth on her skin, running along her clavicle, over her chest, down her stomach, to her. This part actually made me think of a video that I saw recently talking about the problem with romantasy specifically, where the romance is often in direct conflict with very important story beats. So Ophelia is in this freaky death house trying to find her sister and getting attacked by ghouls in the walls and feeling like she's losing her mind. So the fact that she's having naughty thoughts about a ghost that she's met for maybe 5 minutes tops after hearing her missing sister's screams really pulls me out of the story. I cannot take this romance seriously because her brief meeting has no bearing on her current goals, but the story still needs to make it painfully obvious to the readers that this complete stranger, who she doesn't even know the name of, is the love interest. So in order to do that, the main character is going to forget all about nearly dying and her missing sister because she suddenly had a awakening in the bath. The next morning, Ophelia wakes up and goes to wash up in the bathroom when she realizes that the walls are covered in blood and there's a ghoul in her bathtub that tries to get at her. At first, her door is locked, but then suddenly it opens to a black void, and when she falls through, she hears all kinds of whispering before landing in the dining room where she meets the nameless phantom again, and he's like, "You're not supposed to be able to leave your room." He starts grilling her on how she managed to get there, and when she mentions the whispering, he says that she went through something called the Whispering Gate, which is something from the other side that only devils and non-corporeal things are able to access. He finds it interesting that she was able to summon it because normal humans can't, and she's like, well, I'm a necromancer. Except that didn't confirm or deny if that's something that a necromancer can do. So once again, we are not being given any information on what necromancers can and cannot do with their magic, because I don't think the author even knows the purview of her own magic system that she created for this story. Ophelia tells this phantom that she's looking for her sister and mentions the name Gabriel, and he does react to that name but doesn't expand on who he is or how he knows him. Instead, he says that he can make sure she finds her sister for a price, and then he asks for her name and gives her his. To no one's surprise, his name is Blackwell. She tells him her name, and this is how he responds. "Ophelia," he repeated. tasting every syllable. Her name on his tongue sounded like a wicked prayer. You are exactly the person I've been waiting for. Okay, you freak. Jesus Christ. What a weird response to someone's name. So Blackwell tells Ophelia that she is unable to look for her sister until she gets past the 7th trial, because that is when the contestants are all given free range of the entire manor. Blackwell says that he can help Ophelia, and all she needs to do in return is make a blood bargain. Any being that possessed magic could offer a blood bargain to someone, an oath that was unbreakable until every term was fulfilled exactly, and the consequences of such contracts with more powerful beings, like devils, were unavoidable even in death. At first, she's like, absolutely not, but then she does think about the benefits if this guy could actually make sure that she wasn't troubled by the haunts and all the other crazy stuff going on in the manor. Which, at that point, a new question arose for me. Why can't she use her own magic to protect herself from the ghouls and other ghosts and haunts showing up and attacking her? Again, this woman's mother has been hammering spells and knowledge about everything regarding ghosts and devils and the supernatural for her entire life. She says it's a necromancer's job to help wayward ghosts, and one would assume that that would also involve banishing the mindless and violent ones like ghouls who can hurt living people. Yet again, aside from the ritual where she received her mother's magic in the very first chapter, Ophelia has not cast any spells, and all the other times that she has used her magic has been entirely unintentional and has not had anything to do with death magic. So why can't she defend herself from ghouls as a highly trained necromancer who now possesses the culmination of her entire family's magical capabilities? Like, at every turn, I was just begging for the author to outline for me how necromancy works in this setting, because we get little bits sprinkled in when it becomes convenient to using the magic a certain way, but it's never interconnected. We never get like a strict outline of what their capabilities do and don't consist of. Like, we don't ever learn the limitations of her necromantic magic. At random intervals throughout the book, she suddenly gets like, this new ability. She suddenly is able to do something different that is convenient for that moment in the plot that doesn't feel like it is at all connected to the magic system or makes sense with how the magic system does work based on the crumbs that we are given. Ophelia does turn Blackwell down, but at the same time, she needs him to help her get back to her rooms because she is completely helpless without the help of a man. Blackwell literally holds her hand throughout this entire competition. So she lets him talk about what the terms of the bargain would be, even though she is pretty insistent on saying no to it. So I don't know. Here's the first term of my offer. I will clean up any haunts that you may accidentally stumble upon outside of the 9 levels. Within the levels, however, you will have to do the work yourself, but I can assist. Again, why can't she, as a necromancer, do anything to fend off the haunts herself? If her job as a necromancer is to serve as a bridge between the corporeal world and the other side, why can't she do anything about the haunts and ghosts that are harassing her as a necromancer? He then snaps his finger and the ghoul in her room just vanishes. So at the end of the day, Ophelia's arbitrary magic is just completely useless anyway, and he essentially just does everything for her magic-wise. As for Ophelia's side of the bargain, he wants her to search for something necessary for releasing him because he's been trapped in Phantasma for this indeterminable amount of time. He has significant gaps in his memory, and her being a necromancer means that she'll be able to search for things that regular humans can't. This doesn't explain how, it just alludes to her being able to, find things easier, which I guess is a necromancer power. Again, the magic makes zero sense, and there's never any proper clear explanations as to what is and isn't connected to specific types of magic. If Ophelia can't succeed in freeing him before the competition comes to an end, he will take off 10 years of her lifespan. Again, she turns him down. She doesn't accept the bargain right away, but she's gonna crack eventually because Ophelia literally cannot do anything for herself. We then immediately jump to a wet dream that Ophelia is having of Blackwell, and when she wakes up, it says that she's missed breakfast and lunch, and then also reveals that she skipped dinner the night before. So Ophelia, canonically, has not eaten in 24 hours, which is something that will happen super often in this book. I'm not even joking, she eats maybe 3 full meals over the course of 9 days, and on like 1 or 2 other occasions, like a handful of grapes. And I personally just have a lot of opinions regarding books that very clearly, like, don't explicitly kind of sensationalize eating disorders, but with situations like this, it often feels as if it is unintentionally glorifying this kind of eating disorder mentality, because the female main characters, they're always so small and petite, and they never eat. Every time there's a meal on page, they are like skipping it, or for like one reason or another, but then somehow like never actually suffer any kind of negative effects of literally being like starved. Such as Ophelia's case. Again, she hasn't eaten in over 24 hours. I know everyone's body is different, but for me personally, if I don't eat breakfast by a certain time, I get so hungry that I get nauseous and I start like dry heaving from how nauseous I get, even though there's nothing in my stomach. And it's so bad to the point where I like have to crawl to the kitchen on my hands and knees while dry heaving to find something quick to eat to like ease those feelings of nausea. So the fact that Ophelia is running around competing in these death trials while eating once every 2 to 3 days is insane to me. So it's the first official night of Phantasma, like where the trials start. The contestants always gather in the dining hall, and the trials usually take place like immediately after dinner. The host of the first trial appears, and he is a devil named Zell. Zell tells everyone that they'll be receiving a clue before they go through the portal that leads to the first trial, and once they pass through, their only options are to either win the trial or die, or they can call for a devil to make a bargain with them. But I think it's more so just to save their lives. I think if you do call for a devil, you are still disqualified, but because you had to get a devil to help you survive and make it out of the trial alive, you then owe them something like your soul or something. I don't know. It's a little unclear on that. So their clue is a riddle. I will say the riddles in these trials they're not even actually riddles. They literally just kind of spell out how the trial is gonna go. It wasn't all that creative in the riddles. In deepening light, where senses fade, a labyrinth vast, a daunting maze. No sight, no sound, no touch to guide. Navigate true or be crushed inside. Beware the beast within the heart and find the door back to the start. Anyone who takes 2 seconds to really think about this riddle can kind of surmise exactly how it's gonna go. Ophelia enters a trial, and then we get this long-winded explanation regarding the 9 levels of hell, as well as all of the misconceptions surrounding heaven and hell. Heaven is not inherently more good than hell, and hell is not inherently more evil than heaven. Hell is just described as the place humans are sent to be punished for crimes against humanity and the fabric of the universe. What that entails, we're not told. Meanwhile, heaven is the home to ephemeral beings who are tasked with rewarding humans who died with exceptional valor. So essentially, still the exact same fucking concept of heaven and hell that already exists, but I guess it only applies to very extreme cases as opposed to how real world religion views heaven and hell, which again, we don't know what that specifically entails. Essentially, all of the trials are based off of one of the 9 levels of hell, so they're all themed after that. Based on all of her teachings about the circles of hell, Ophelia realizes that she is in the circle of limbo, which is complete sensory deprivation. She can still see, but she can't, like, she's lost her touch, can't hear anything. I'm assuming she's also lost smell and taste, but like that can't really be applied to the trial at hand. So she has to go through this white stone corridor maze with none of her senses but sight. But as the trial progresses, the lights slowly begin to get dimmer and dimmer. So eventually, if you don't make it out, you will be having to navigate a maze in complete darkness without touch or hearing or anything. Ophelia realizes that she can use her magical blue sparks to carve into the walls to mark where she's been. I guess that this was fine. I mean, once again, she's supposed to be a necromancer, yet I don't know how this particular skill is at all associated with necromancy or death magic, but whatever. Also, it talks about how she has no control over it, but she apparently has enough control over this to be very precise with like carving directions, but then at a later point in the book, she just seems to lose any kind of like real control over her magic. It's weird. It's weird. I feel like this video is going to mainly consist about me complaining about the arbitrary magic and how it makes no sense and is really inconsistent throughout the story. So the lights are getting dimmer, and she also realizes that the walls are closing in on her, obviously, because it said in the riddle that if you can't get through, you'll be crushed. She finally makes it to the center of the maze, but guarding the exit door is a sleeping hellhound, and in this story, hellhounds only serve to guard something, and so long as whatever they're guarding remains untouched, it'll stay asleep. Except in that moment, two other contestants also make it into the center and bolt for the door. They get out, but the moment they touched it, everyone's senses have returned, and the hellhound wakes up, and then it starts to chase Ophelia back through the maze. Ophelia runs into another contestant named Leon. He's nearly killed by the hellhound when he trips, but suddenly, Ophelia remembers that she has magic that she can use, and summons all of the blue sparks that she can to send out a wave like when she was first attacked by the ghoul on her first night. Because of this, she and Leon are able to make it back to the exit and escape, but deeper into the maze, as she's like leaving, it says that she can hear like people screaming and bones crunching. This I thought was extremely lame. It's supposed to be in the dark genre, but the entire time I was reading at least this particular trial, I was thinking that it would have made this trial more interesting if as she was going through, she was actively seeing other contestants getting crushed by the walls who weren't able to make it to the next corridor, or at the very least, like, witness someone else being torn apart by the hellhound. But no, like, this trial was pretty uneventful, and it ended pretty quickly, and it was just kind of really boring, and a lot of the trials are very much the same way. I mentioned a book called The Terrace Trials by Lucian Burr before in my, I think it was Blood of Hercules video, specifically because I thought that it was a much better example of a post-apocalypse dark academia inspired by Greek lore. But when I was reading this book, like The Trials, it did make me think about the Terrace Trials and how much better like the trials and challenges in that book were written. I remember being absolutely just messed up by the stuff going on in that story. Like this book has some gore, but like I feel like the gore and horror and like dark aspects of the Terrace Trials were so much better. So like, not to shamelessly plug random books in the middle of my deep dives, but if you want a really well-written dark fiction with high stakes that like actually have you on the edge of your seat, like the stakes are so high you don't know who is going to make it out alive, and the main characters also, kind of like what I mentioned earlier in this video, actually experience like permanent damage from injuries that they sustain. It's really good. If that's something that is up your alley, absolutely read The Terrace Trials by Lucian Burr. That book is so insane. And it even has smut, but I will say that it is gay smut. So if you're only into heterosexual spice, I don't really know what to tell you. Again, my username is The Queer Reader. I primarily read queer, like LGBT books. I do keep meaning to read the other two books in this series, but as I've stated before in previous videos, dark fiction and horror really are not my favorite books to read, and that one in particular took a lot out of me. It was just really intense, so I can't speak for books 2 and 3, but I can absolutely say that like book 1 was a wild ride, and in general, I think Lucian Burr and Seth Haddon, he's the same author, just writing under 2 pseudonyms. I really like his writing, I really like his stories. If anyone is interested in sports romance, he recently released a heated rivalry, but for jousting, which was a really fun read. Yeah, just gonna plug queer authors that I really like because I don't know, it's more fun than crashing out over this book. I want to have at least something positive in my video, and so plugging authors that I think deserve recognition is one of those. Anyway, back to the story. Ophelia makes it out of the trial, and she immediately starts yelling at the two guys who made it through and woke the hellhound. Their names are Cade and Bo, antagonistic characters throughout the story, but she starts yelling at them about how they're selfish bastards for endangering everyone, and they do point out that there can only be one winner, and this competition is quite literally like every person for themselves. So I guess it was just kind of like a way of showing, even though she's just like really antisocial and not open to any kind of positive relationship between other contestants who do extend her a hand of friendship, she's a good person person because she cares about human life. She just starts getting really upset about the nature of this game and how insidious the devils are for taking advantage of contestants who will have to make deals with them in order to survive the trials. And that made me remember at the beginning of the trial when it was doing info dumping about how like hell is not inherently evil, devils are not inherently evil, but then like at the same time throughout the book, she herself is like, oh, devils are so sick and twisted and evil because they're so malicious and they get entertainment from watching people suffer. And it's just like, okay, so is hell actually evil or not? Yeah, it's the place where people go to be punished, but also it seems like in the story the author portrays devils as these pretty terrible people. So it's like, which is it? Are they more or less evil than heaven? Are the misconceptions of heaven and hell actually true, or are devils really as bad as everyone thinks that they are based on what's going on within the mansion? It's, again, a lot of inconsistencies. So she calls Cade a bunch of names and he gets mad about that and grabs her arm, and when she tries to get away from him, her whole arm disappears and she slips out of his grasp, and he freaks out, accusing her of being one of the devils, who I guess is like an industry plant there to trick everyone. Dunno. Another issue that I had with this particular power, because her turning invisible does come up a lot. When she turns invisible, it specifically talks about how she is completely invisible and incorporeal, but it never calls it being incorporeal. When I think about invisibility, I think of the person is still physically there, they are just unable to be seen, but that is not the case. Parts of her body, when she uses this ability, completely cease to exist. People pass right through that space where her arm or chest or whatever, or her full body was. That's, in my opinion, I don't know if there are other definitions of invisibility that include ceasing to exist in the physical plane. In my understanding of invisibility, that is not invisibility. That is becoming incorporeal. But it still uses terms like corporeal and incorporeal in other situations, but not when talking about her invisibility. So that's really weird. That was another inconsistency that I picked up on that drove me absolutely bananas when reading this book, because like there is a big difference between being invisible and incorporeal. It's stating that she's invisible, yet everything describing about her invisibility abilities is aligning with incorporeal abilities. So it's makes me so mad. Anyway, in the middle of all this, the room suddenly goes dark and all of the food that was on the tables suddenly turns rotten and is covered with bugs. It kind of like does that whole Lost Boys thing where everything that looked like normal food is now like maggot ridden and everything. Ophelia insists that she's not the one doing this, but Cade isn't convinced and he attacks her with a steak knife and tries to stab her in the chest, but then that part of her body disappears suddenly, and then at that point Blackwell shows up and nearly breaks Cade's arm for both attacking her and calling her really derogatory names, which, like, okay, like green flag, I guess. Blackwell drinks his respect women juice, but I don't know, I feel like he only really respects Ophelia because when he talks about all of his other past relationships or interactions with other women that he has had any kind of intimate relationship with, he's always framed it as like, oh, they meant nothing to me, but you mean something to me. And I'm like, that right there is a major red flag. If any guy is talking about his past relations and making it seem like that person, he just was either crazy or just what they had wasn't real or whatever, that's an immediate red flag for me. But other than that, for the most part, Blackwell seems like a pretty decent guy. Anyway, again, I'm getting so off track. The room is being swarmed by these massive spiders and giant snakes, and Blackwell kind of like grabs her to try and lead her out, but they're cut off by this giant man-eating snake. And he tells her, hey, when I tell you to run, run. And this is what Ophelia says. Couldn't you just make it go away? Not without payment. Unless you're changing your mind about my offer, I don't have enough power to get rid of the serpent or transport you somewhere with me. I love how Ophelia twice has refused his bargain, but still expects Blackwell to protect her more than he already has. And I just like, it's giving entitled brat. She still, again, for a third time, refuses his bargain. So he's like, okay, girl, you better get ready to run then. He disappears and she's waiting for him to cause a distraction and whatever to give her the signal. But that apparently takes too long for her liking, and she suddenly starts to assume that he was just tricking her. But why would he have hidden her from the snake in the first place if he was just gonna let it eat her regardless? Like, that, there was no point in that. He could have just stood by and watched as she got attacked by a giant snake. So when he doesn't give her the signal fast enough, she decides to bolt before he's ready for her. And wouldn't you know it, this silly bitch gets chomped by the giant man-eating snake. Ophelia is so genuinely insufferable. There's just so many instances of her just making the dumbest decisions, and I hate her. We do get like a crumb of an explanation as to how necromantic magic works. And at this point, it's a quarter into the book. So, you know, that's really great for outlining your magic system in like a timely way. Wish that it had been done sooner. Her magic wasn't like a witch's or demon's. It could not transform into ice or fire or any other element. A necromancer's magic came out as pure energy. So while she could light a candle with her magic's friction, she wasn't able to actually wield the flames. Necromancers were meant to be a bridge between the corporeal plane and the other side, to bring life and energy to that which was dead or undead. Replenishing that sort of magic quickly required one of two things: the life force of another being or rest, neither of which was currently an option. That was literally just an explanation as to why she suddenly has no magic to fight off the snake. And like, that's fine. Like, okay, that's an interesting explanation. Cool. Thanks for like that. I feel like that's pretty obvious. People often, when expending large amounts of magic, have to rest to regain their magic. So whatever. That's kind of a given. It doesn't actually expand on what she is fully capable of with her magic, but it does explain the blue sparks, I guess, because rather than being like fire or ice or whatever, it's just like energy. And I guess energy manifests as blue sparks. Ophelia sees a sword hanging on the wall and manages to stick it in the snake before it can take another chunk out of her and disappears into smoke. In that moment, Ophelia sees the silhouette of her sister beckoning to her, but runs off before she's like able to follow her. So she's trying to like chase this thing that like looks like her sister, and then she passes out, but that's okay because Blackwell suddenly swoops in and catches her and tucks her into bed like a gentleman. When she wakes up, Blackwell tells her that the thing she was chasing was actually a poltergeist trying to possess her. Like I said earlier, poltergeists are deceased devils, and if they can possess you completely, they can essentially resurrect their old devil forms. I think this was literally like the only instance that poltergeists ever show up or are mentioned. Yeah, but I feel like there were a lot of instances where something was like included just like as a one-time thing, I guess, to make things more interesting, but then like never did anything with it again. He also tells her that anyone with the ability to shift between planes are able to watch the trials, and she's like, what? So this is all just entertainment for apparitions? And he says that it's mostly the devils who watch and make bets on the trials. The apparitions don't really invest themselves much with the happenings in Phantasma outside of their debts. The devils, on the other hand, they have a betting pool for each group. Don't worry, you're not in their loser brackets yet. That's sick. A devil is a devil. Again, are devils evil or not? Are devils inherently more evil than angels are good? Like, it's stated that there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding hell and devils and demons, but then it still reinforces that by making them just objectively awful, horrible individuals. I love how essentially the whole premise of Phantasma is literally just Squid Games, but without any kind of commentary surrounding real-world issues like poverty, class disparity, or how the rich exploit the poor for entertainment. Majority of the people participating in Phantasma are rich white people whose families are either in debt or going bankrupt, and the entire time I was just sitting there like, okay, and I struggle to understand why I should feel bad for all of these rich nepo babies who are struggling financially. Like, yeah, get in line. Story of my life, dude. You know what would have made me actually root for any of the contestants or feel bad for their situations? If there were like marginalized people competing in this game for things that are not just saving their family fortune. I feel like that would have made things a lot more compelling, and I would have actually been rooting for literally any of the characters within this book. But no, literally every single person in this game is just a rich white person trying to maintain their status quo, and therefore I did not care about what happened to any of them including Ophelia, because again, she's just another rich white woman. We get more arbitrary and confusing magic system stuff that doesn't make any sense. They're talking about her magic, and she's like, I think you're putting a lot of stock into abilities I can't even seem to control. When Cade tried to stab me, I disappeared. I've never done that before. My mother never mentioned that's something necromancies are even capable of. Maybe that power is particular to your personal brand of magic. It's possible for the same types of beings to have unique abilities. So, according to Blackwell just now, necromancers can have unique, never-before-seen abilities that are not connected to necromancy at all. But, like, also, at a later point in the book, it does actually explain where she got her, like, incorporeal, invisible, disappearing, whatever powers, and it has nothing to do with necromancy. So, I'm not even joking. I haven't read a magic system more confusing and convoluted since the age of Scorpius. Everything just... There really is just like no rhyme or reason to anything, how it works. The magic system, it drives me so crazy in this book. Even though she's barely into the competition, Ophelia does actually agree to a blood bargain with Blackwell, and in order to summon him, all she has to do is say his name 3 times.
Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice.
Ophelia then starts trauma dumping onto Blackwell for a bit before telling him about the hidden passageway that she found like her very first night when she was attacked, and he's like, well, damn girl, why didn't you mention that sooner? Let's check it out. Because, you know, he's hoping that they can find his anchor that is keeping him trapped in Phantasma. He does tell her a little bit more about the specifics of the game, and she wonders about why he's stuck there if he's not one of the ghosts who perform the haunts within the competition. And he's like, I know about as much as you do, baby girl. They get to the end of the corridor, but when they open the door, it's just a broom closet like before. So Ophelia tries to summon a doorway to this secret room that she found before, and she does, but then again, like, there's no explanation for how she's able to summon doorways, because that was never explicitly stated that that was involved in necromancy, like that and the Whispering Gate and everything, so... She just has that ability for the sake of having that ability in this moment. They get into the secret room, but there's actually nothing there, so that was just kind of like a dead end, and then they go exploring the drinking parlor and then the library. Because he needs her to use her powers to dig deeper, she tells Blackwell that she needs to feel connected to him for it to work, so she asks him if he remembers anything about his life before he became trapped in Phantasma. This doesn't come up again, and at no point in her half-assed investigations does she ever try to feel out a connection to Blackwell to search for clues. He doesn't remember how he came here, but supposedly he must be the ghost of an immortal being, like a vampire or some such, because that's how phantoms are made apparently, and why they're so rare and powerful. That question obviously doesn't get her anywhere, so she decides to go for the tried and true question that is guaranteed to make you instantly form a deeper connection with anyone that you ask about. That being, of course, what his favorite color is.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
I'm sorry, but what is it with authors these days not knowing how to organically build up chemistry and relationships between characters that don't involve the most inane icebreaker questions? And of course, he responds with red while fondling the scarlet ribbon that she's currently wearing in her hair. This immediately gave me flashbacks to my Bonds of Hercules video. What are your favorite colors? Gold, Karen said softly as he reached up and wrapped his pointer finger in one of my curls. He tugged at it. Ask me what my favorite color was before you. What was your favorite color? I whispered. Nothing. He stared at me with cold intensity. I didn't notice colors before you. While these two are having one of history's most boring flirt sessions, Jasper shows up to antagonize Blackwell and makes some kind of comment about how he apparently has this MO where he makes moves on the people that he's made a bargain with, and like kind of teasing Ophelia because he apparently hasn't made any moves on her. And for some reason, this upsets her because immediately after they leave, she's like, What, am I not your type? Girl, your sister is missing, and you're trapped in this death house looking for some ghost anchor in order to free Blackwell and keep the 10 years of your life that you put up as collateral, and your biggest concern is being butt mad that the man you don't know or trust doesn't find you attractive. Be so for real right now. Kissing shouldn't even be a blip on the radar of her priorities. And you want to know the worst thing about this book so far? Typically, I hate the male interests in romanticises and dark romance like this book just as much, but usually more than the female main character. But so far, I don't dislike Blackwell. He's a little bit full of himself, and there are moments throughout the story where he makes a stupid decision that was clearly just like the author trying to fill in some kind of trope like touch her and you die type thing. But as far as I can tell at this point, he's been really forthcoming about his situation, and he like multiple times has gone out of his way to help Ophelia even before she agreed to his bargain. He gets defensive of her when like men disrespect her. He has like used his magic to help her when she's repeatedly turned down his bargain. He attempted to help her with the giant snake before she made a mess of that. Like sure, he may be taking a decade of her life, but that's only if she fails to free him before Phantasma ends. He wants her to succeed in the end, and he does a fair amount for her throughout this entire process. He does make like a salacious, flirty comment here and there, but he's not super disgusting about it. Ophelia, however, is incredibly entitled and childish and hung up on all the wrong things, and as the story progressed, I just cared less and less about her well-being. I actually don't want her to succeed, because that is how deeply unlikable I find her. Of course she doesn't, but like I was hoping for Lucy to win the game, because so far, like, she was the only decent character in this book, if you ask me. I couldn't stand her sister. I can't stand her. Blackwell is okay. He's whatever. There's nothing special. He's not completely hateable like most love interests are. But yeah, like she was the only character that I even like remotely liked. So Ophelia has to go to the dining room before the second trial, and everyone is gathered there for dinner. She starts getting harassed by Cade, who slaps her, and then she starts bleeding from a split lip. And it says that demons and devils and apparitions don't bleed. So everyone else is like, yo, dude, she's immortal like the rest of us because she's bleeding, her blood is red, like she's a person. And that gets him to back off. The rest of the dinner was awkward, to say the least. Ophelia didn't eat anything. I want to point out again, Ophelia hasn't eaten since the previous night, just before the first trial. And if you remember, she hadn't eaten anything in 24 hours prior to that single meal that she had last night. So Ophelia has eaten exactly one meal in the last 3 days, and I'm trying to figure out how she can still function. But that's sort of like this unwritten rule of romantasy. Female main characters just don't need to eat. A different devil shows up, and she's the host of the second trial, which is lust. So of course, she's the sexy devil. The clue they're given is, in a realm of desire, illusions enthrall. Contestants beware, lest you succumb to their call. Amongst the lustful vices, you must pick only one. When the first bell tolls, the trial has begun. Before the fourth chime, the truth you must find, and the key to your freedom beneath a bed lies. So when Ophelia enters the trial, she finds herself in the middle of this huge orgy, and someone with a tray of 5 different colored drinks tells her that she has a minute to choose one before she's kicked out, but she isn't told what any of them are. She chooses the red drink, and then every person in the room is served that same drink, and when she takes it, she sort of enters this dreamlike, lustful trance. A dancer is murdered, and all the other people in the room start rushing to drink their blood, and some random woman tries to drink Ophelia's blood, but then Blackwell shows up out of nowhere despite the fact that she didn't Beetlejuice him into existence. The drink they gave you at the start was a slow-acting poison. Each color would make you and the rest of the room experience one of 5 types of lust, and it would slowly kill you unless you broke through its effects and realized you needed an antidote. So the red is apparently bloodlust. We don't know what any of the other lusts were. It's not important. He gives her what he says is the antidote and tells her that she can't leave the trial until she performs a task themed with the type of lust that she had chosen. In order to complete this one, she has to let someone drink her blood and then drink theirs in return. She refuses to drink the blood of some stranger in the room, so he's like, cool, do you want me to go first or would you rather drink mine? And I was like, hold up, literally just a chapter ago, it stated that only mortals can bleed, and that's literally how they were able to prove that Ophelia wasn't like a ghost or devil or demon or anything supernatural. But Blackwell is a phantom, which is the ghost of an immortal being that presumably would not be able to bleed. So how can she drink his blood if he is neither living nor immortal? You would think that this would have been the clue that told her this wasn't Blackwell, and that the trial was complete bunk. But no, she realizes that it's not Blackwell, specifically because he calls her sweetheart instead of angel, which is what he's been calling her essentially since he first met her. Also, it says that his touch is cold, which you'd think that it would be cold anyway because he's a phantom, which is a type of ghost, but apparently phantoms' touch aren't ice cold. They, I guess, apparently, even though they're dead, they still feel like a living person's touch. I don't know, it's never actually explicitly expanded on within this, but it made a big deal about his touch feeling cold, and that was like a big red flag for her. And I'm just like, well, why wouldn't it feel cold? He's dead. He's a dead thing. Anyway, she then fights off the not Blackwell, and then the real Blackwell shows up, but not because she summoned him. She did say his name 3 times, but it wasn't consecutive or with any intentions. She was just talking to the person she thought was Blackwell, and the 3rd time that she said the name Blackwell was when she was like, "You're not Blackwell," before fighting this dude off. So apparently, she can't even mention this guy's name, even in conversation, without inadvertently summoning him every single time she says it on the 3rd time, because that makes so much sense. It turns out there wasn't actually a trick to finishing the trial. That whole bit that the not Blackwell was saying was simply just to like try and trick her into failing the trial, because I think if she had tasted anyone's blood, she would have failed the trial. And the only other thing that's left is literally to just flip every bed until they find the exit. Honestly, these riddles were so comically simple, and the only reason Ophelia herself doesn't figure any of them out is because she doesn't actually think. She never uses any kind of critical thinking in this book. Like, the riddles literally spell out how the trial is going to go and how to succeed in the trial, and even where the exit is. And still, Blackwell has to be the one to tell her that the exit is underneath one of the beds. While they're turning mattresses over, looking for the exit, some random person in the orgy starts trying to make a pass at Ophelia, and at first she's like, ew, gross, don't touch me, but then he suddenly transforms into Blackwell, and suddenly she is incapable of fighting him off, despite the fact that the real Blackwell is literally standing right there, and she knows that this is an illusion because she just watched this person transform into Blackwell, but for some reason she's so enraptured by him that she's unable to fight him off in the moment when he's trying to pull her onto the bed. And it's not until Blackwell is literally standing there being like, hey girl, you know that's not me, right? That this illusion is broken, and she's reminded that the guy she just watched transform into Blackwell is not actually Blackwell. Again, Ophelia is just an idiot for no reason other than it's convenient for the plot. Apparently, she is so in lust with this man that she's unable to rub 2 brain cells together, even though she knows that he's standing like right there next to or behind her, and this stranger illusion, whatever, was not Blackwell, and then suddenly was Blackwell. But apparently it's a really good illusion, and I mean, honestly, it's super easy to trick this woman throughout this story. Like, she falls for really obvious tricks all the time. They make it out of the trial, but Ophelia then has a panic attack because she's starting to question her sanity. I guess because she couldn't tell the difference between Blackwell and not Blackwell, even though she just watched this person who was not Blackwell transform into Blackwell, with Blackwell still standing right next to her. But apparently that was enough for her to question her sanity. And he spends like the next however many pages like reassuring her and comforting her. And again, like, I don't hate Blackwell. All things considered, he seems like a pretty decent recent book boyfriend. Here was another inconsistency that really threw me off. So you remember how she got slapped by Cade and it split her lip? Apparently it's still bleeding when Blackwell notices it and like runs his thumb over it, and he uses his magic to heal it immediately. But what about her innate super healing that makes her heal very quickly after only a few minutes of getting injured? But apparently it didn't heal her split lip. So I guess that her innate super healing only works sometimes, because you think a split lip would have healed by now, especially since Ophelia's scratched up arm from her first night healed by like halfway only after a few minutes, and at this point it's like fully healed 2 days later. But apparently all the time spent doing the trial wasn't enough for a cut lip. I love the lack of consistency within this story. At this point, like, it's not even important anymore, because she no longer has to worry about her body regenerating by itself within the story, because now that she has Blackwell, he just heals all of her injuries immediately anyway. So that little bit about her innate healing kind of just immediately falls off from the story, despite establishing it just a few chapters ago. Blackwell does the stereotypical "who did this to you" nonsense, and then disappears to terrorize Cade while she is like leaving her by herself. At this time, Lucy shows up, and after one very short conversation, Ophelia somehow deduces that Lucy is like falling in love with Leon, who is the guy that Ophelia saved in the first trial, even though like we are only 3 days into Phantasma. And then once again, Ophelia is like really needlessly mean to Lucy, and the personality switch up between her with Blackwell and her with Lucy is absolutely bananas. Then they start talking about another contestant, and it mentions airboat tours, and while reading this book, I have been trying to piece together the timeline of where this story takes place since like page 1. At first I thought it must be sometime around the late 1800s to early 1900s, because it mentions streetcars existing, but the main mode of transportation seemed to still be carriages. But airboats didn't become available to civilian use until the 1930s, which is all fine and good, except Ophelia is constantly described as wearing much older style fashion, like dresses with puffy sleeves and corsets, whereas women's fashion in the 1930s were not that. Honestly, the way her clothing was described reminded me more of what Edith wore in Crimson Peak, but that movie takes place in 1901. So essentially, if we're like lining the years up based on when airboat tours became a common thing versus the style of dress that she wears, her fashion sense is behind by a minimum of 30 years, which, sure, she could just be a vintage girly, but at the same time, no one is ever commenting on her outdated, decades-old fashion sense. Normally, I don't get this hung up on historical accuracy in fantasy and fiction books, but like, I mean, this story is set in a real place. It is fiction, but New Orleans does exist, and based on the technology that is present in this period, her walking around with Victorian-style nightgowns and candelabras in the 1930s or 1940s, in my opinion, is just a little goofy. Ophelia then finds out that Leon and Lucy were actually part of Genevieve's social circle, and Lucy even talks about how she like tried to get Genevieve to like bring Ophelia along with her to social gatherings and like introduce her to all of her friends, and then for absolutely no reason, Ophelia gets really butt mad about that. Like, I guess it's weird because it does explain that Genevieve has always been really good at making friends and like existing in different social circles, but in this moment she finds out that Genevieve did have friends that she didn't know about, and she suddenly treats this like it's a new discovery, like this is breaking news, something that she hadn't expected. That was kind of weird because it acknowledges in the very beginning of the book that Genevieve was a very like social butterfly and, you know, made friends very easily, but whatever. But yeah, she gets mad about the fact that other people knew Genevieve. Our conversation is done. I don't know how close you and Genevieve were, but that does not make the two of us allies. If you were smart, you wouldn't be making allies at all. It will only lead to heartbreak. That's really rich coming from someone who has allied herself with and relied very heavily on a complete stranger this early on in the competition. Like, Ophelia is genuinely such a hypocrite, and I hate her. Day 2. of recording. Last we left off, Ophelia was being just an absolute butthead to Lucy and Leon for no reason. Leon and Lucy leave, and then Ophelia starts tossing books around to investigate the bookshelves and finds a mechanism built into one of the top shelves. But before she can press it, Jasper suddenly shows up and tries to convince Ophelia to make a deal with him and overturn her deal with Blackwell, and she refuses, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, 2 more devils literally teleport into the library mid-coitus, and Jasper just like bounces. I have no idea why this scene was necessary at all, other than to remind the reader how sexually repressed Ophelia is. It had zero bearing on the story and literally came out of nowhere, and it just moved on from it so very quickly. So while the 2 devils are doing the nasty, Ophelia goes and presses the button on the shelf, and then the shelf rotates, trapping her on the other side in some dark room. Ophelia immediately panics and summons Blackwell, and when he does show up, she throws herself at him, and I'm not even joking, they did that whole, "You came, you called." You remember how just a few pages ago, Ophelia was criticizing Lucy for catching feelings for the guy that she's teamed up with and is relying on to make it through these death trials? She immediately turns around and does the exact same thing that she was judging Lucy for. They start investigating the corridor, and it's a dead end, but they find a series of marked bricks that they press in order that reveals a crawl space, but when that happens, suddenly acid starts dripping from the ceiling, and they have to rush to avoid getting their whole shop wrecked by acid rain. Blackwell then starts berating himself like, ugh, if I hadn't expended so much of my powers torturing that Cade guy, I could have transported you away. Yeah, that was really stupid of you to just run off and be an aggressive toucher and you die book boyfriend when the 2 of you are searching for your anchor. It's not like there's a ton of things that want to kill Ophelia within this manner, and you shouldn't leave her by herself to waste all your power on some guy when a haunt could show up at any moment and endanger her. There's a couple moments like these where just out of nowhere, Blackwell is suddenly just as stupid as Ophelia is. Especially because he reveals that every time she gets hurt, it unravels their bargain, and it could eventually get to the point where he can't come to her when she tries to summon him. This didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. They made a magical blood bargain. How can it just weaken if she gets injured? Also, why didn't you think of that before you decided to run off and be petty with Cade? You'd think as a centuries-old powerful phantom who is riding on this bargain with Ophelia, he'd keep a closer eye on her, but I guess not. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that all of this is happening while she is mostly naked, because when the acid got on her dress, Blackwell had to rip her clothes off in order to keep it from burning her skin. They have this entire conversation, and she goes on an angry rant, and it's not until Blackwell points it out that she realizes she's in her underwear. Yeah, because it's just so easy to forget when you're that exposed. These 2 immediately forget about how they almost just died and start bumping and grinding in the middle of this secret room for no reason. And what's funny is, while they're getting hot and heavy, Blackwell uses his magic to instantly make the rest of their clothing disappear. Which is funny because when he was trying to keep her from being burned by acid, he was having to remove her clothes manually. And he just said that he used too much magic to teleport her to safety and remove her burning clothes quickly, but conveniently has enough when it comes to schmexy times. I really can't stand it in books when the magic is clearly only for the sake of situational convenience within specific moments, and otherwise has zero sense or continuity throughout the story. Immediately after he makes her jizz and splizz, she's like, this can't happen again. Plot twist, this will continue to happen multiple times. Then she accidentally knocks over a candelabra and notices something etched into the floor. The first word is scratched out, but the phrase reads, "Blank and Gabriel forever." They return to her room, and Blackwell says that he'll see if he can convince the devils to get him the contestants log, because they keep records of every person who comes into the manor. And while he does that, he tells her to go ahead and get some rest before the next trial. And you know what this goofy bitch does? She does that whole, but what if a haunt appears, while hanging off of his sleeve? Ophelia is just suddenly acting like she is completely helpless and has no magical abilities whatsoever. As if she can't expel bursts of magical energy and turn parts of herself incorporeal when someone tries to stab her. The next day, Ophelia wakes up and her OCD intrusive thoughts start telling her that she embarrassed herself with Blackwell and how she's undesirable and all the standard self-hating stuff. Even though she's literally a rich, petite, white woman with blue eyes. Yes, tell me more about how undesirable you are, Ophelia. You are quite literally the beauty standard. Blackwell shows up and immediately starts soothing her. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, he vowed. Next time your mind tries to convince you otherwise, remember this. There is nothing about you that I find undesirable, okay? Y'all have known each other for less than 4 days, but sure. Blackwell makes a deal with Jasper to get a hold of the logs, but before that, he tells her that she needs to learn how to control her magic before the upcoming trials, and guess what this girl says? I'll pass. You would be an insufferable teacher. I just love how the main character has all this magic that she herself admits she can't control, and instead of making even a fraction of an attempt to learn so that she doesn't have to rely on Blackwell 24/7, she's just like, no. I genuinely want to slap this woman. She is so insufferable. I genuinely don't know what's worse. Main characters who are written to be capable yet fail to prove it within the narrative, or a main character who is willfully helpless on purpose. He straight up tells her that the rest of the trials are much harder than the first two, and this is her reaction. Aww, she pressed a mocking hand to her chest. Are you saying you'd be sad if I were to get maimed or die? Yes, you dumb fucking walnut, you guys made a bargain and he needs you to help free him. Also, more than that, you should be worrying about getting maimed or dying yourself. Like, did you just forget that you need to survive long enough to find your sister? I can't believe I'm saying this, but Blackwell is actually being so reasonable and explaining to her how there's only so much he can do to help her through the rest of the trials, and this woman is acting like a petulant fucking child. I can't believe that this book is making me side with a straight man. Let me train you so you don't end up perishing tragically. Fine, I suppose your tutoring cannot possibly be worse than whatever creative death the next level has planned. Ooh, I want to hit you so bad. To Blackwell's credit, he was a decent instructor, though she could do without the smug grins whenever she tried something contrary to his suggestions and it backfired. So what you're telling me is that Ophelia intentionally ignores Blackwell's instructions and then gets mad when he turns out to be correct? Remember when I explained how rare and powerful phantoms are? They're supposed to be one of the most powerful category of ghosts. Now she is one literally offering his services and helping her grow stronger in order to survive these death matches, and every step of the way she is acting like an infant. I'm beginning to realize why she was such a disappointment to her mother. It also explains how Blackwell does a better job at teaching her magic in just 1 hour than her mother ever did in her entire life. Are you kidding me right now? It explains that her mother had only been able to describe magic to her, and only now is she able to experience it firsthand. I know that it wasn't until her mother died that she inherited her magic, but I thought that Ophelia still would have held some magical capabilities. I thought that this was a necromancer family, not the family has one single necromancer and no one else can use magic until the prime wielder dies. That's not a necromantic family. That's a family with one necromancer. And if that's the case, how were her mother and grandmother and literally everyone who ever inherited the magic able to master their magic right away if it wasn't experience that they built over time? And according to this book, by the time a person inherits their magic, they don't have anyone to show them how to use it because the only person who could do so just died. Also, if ghosts are able to teach the wielder how to control their magic, why isn't it a custom within the family to have a resident apparition be present when the time comes for a new necromancer to inherit the previous one's magic after they die? Apparently, the standard for necromancy is just learn as you go and hope you don't muck it up. That seems really counterintuitive when necromancers are supposed to be the bridge between the living and the dead, but apparently they're all starting out as square one as fully grown adults depending on when their predecessors croak. I hate this magic system! Blackwell also decides to test her little incorporeal trick where she avoided being stabbed by summoning a knife that flies directly at her. If this were literally anyone else, I would be ringing all of the red flag alarm bells with this behavior, but I despise Ophelia, and I actually thought that this was really funny. I think it would be delightful if he stabbed her, because then that meant that I wouldn't have to put up with her anymore. Jasper shows up with the contestant log, but there isn't any time to go through it because dinner is called before the next trial. Ophelia is walking through the corridor and suddenly has this strange vision of her at some fancy soiree dancing with Blackwell before he pulls her into a private room where they start getting nasty, but then she snaps out of it. This is the only time that something like this happens, and it never comes up again in the book. Also, I just want to remind everyone that within the text, the only meal that's ever mentioned is dinner. At no point within this story has it ever talked about breakfast or lunch being available within these trials. And also, with all of the investigating and magic training and everything else going on within the text, there literally isn't time for Ophelia to stop to have breakfast or lunch, even if it wasn't explicitly stated within the book. So over the last 4 days, Ophelia has eaten a single meal on page, because if you remember, she skipped dinner before the second trial. And the only thing that she eats tonight before the third trial is some grapes. Again, I ask how this woman is able to function when the only time she's eaten is the night of the first trial and now a handful of grapes. I fear that the romantasy and dark romance genres are never beating the eating disorder allegations. A new devil shows up and gives everyone the clue to the third trial. Above a fiery abyss, your gilded cage must rise, but when it does, others will dive. Golden weights around your chains, greed's alluring song, a dangerous game, a sea of temptation, a choice to unfold, decide if your life is worth its weight in gold. So they enter the trial, and just as the riddle suggests, they are trapped in cages above lava, and hers is already lowering when she enters. And even though Blackwell told her to summon him immediately when she enters, this idiot immediately forgets when she sees where she is, and instead reaches out and touches a burning hot chain and injures her hand. When she does summon Blackwell, he can't actually appear in the cage with her because of something about each cage only being allowed so much weight, so he can only project his voice and give her directions. This part was a little confusing. So from within this cage, and like it's a big cage, because she has to like walk, it's big enough that she has to walk back and forth from a stone wall to the counterweight chain. Yet she has to, while inside this cage, climb the wall that she's dangling next to and find golden counterweights to hook to the chain of her cage that will lift it. And when she does that, it will lower someone else's cage. I don't know. This was kind of a weird visual thinking of it. Like, how are you climbing a wall while also inside a cage? Yeah, whatever. Except remember how instead of following the very simple instructions given to her by Blackwell, Ophelia decided to fuck around with the scalding hot chain. Her hand is burnt to the point of blistering, and Blackwell can't heal her. What did I tell you about getting injured and summoning me immediately? I don't know what to tell you if you don't think being distracted by a giant abyss of lava is a reasonable excuse for making a couple of mistakes. Girl, you were given literally one job and you couldn't even do that. Ophelia has the survival instincts of a fucking dodo bird. I can't heal you, but I have to use my hand to climb. Well, maybe this will teach you to follow basic instructions in the future, you stale piece of cornbread. His voice sounded strained now, his words taut with something she couldn't quite place, and she wondered if it was anger or frustration at her foolishness for touching the hot chain, or if it was something else, something considered dangerous here. I actually feel so bad for Blackwell because he's so clearly down bad for the most useless, brainless piece of soggy cardboard. I haven't hated a female main character this much since Blood of Hercules, and even then, Alexis was not this helpless. It's so funny how simple this trial actually is, but the only thing stopping Ophelia from getting through it is the fact that she has beans for brains. I did think that the idea of this trial was interesting because every time you let a counterweight drop, your cage shoots up, but other contestants fall, so there's this moral conundrum of potentially killing others in order to survive. And at first, Ophelia does seem to struggle with this, but then she sees Cade and suddenly stops caring about the sanctity of life and her own sense of humanity when his cage drops. Also, the counterweights are solid gold, and you have the choice of hanging onto them because if you make it out of the challenge, you get to take them with you. Except if you think about it, if you win, you can just ask for riches anyway. So if you came to Phantasma for money, which a lot of people did, why would you risk your life and chance of winning for a few bits of gold? Immediately after the trial, Blackwell and Ophelia get hot and heavy, and he undresses her and eats her kitty cat in the middle of the corridor just outside the dining hall, where anyone could walk by and see them. Remember when she was like, this won't happen again? Girl could not even make it a full 24 hours. He teleports her back to the room and they start really getting into it, and they're both just like, oh my god, you're so beautiful, you're so angelic, you're so stunning. And again, y'all have known each other for 4 days. Chill. I will say the author does get some points because Blackwell actually takes the time to stretch Ophelia out, and that is a major complaint that I have in romance books when they don't do any kind of foreplay or preparation, and it's somehow not painful when the love interest shoves his massive ding-a-ling inside her hoo-ha. The schmex was still kind of goofy though. The way he stretched her was sinful, euphoric. He was so deep she swore she could feel him in her soul. Okay. Just as they're about to finish, a haunt suddenly appears and it starts raining blood in her room. And instead of letting Blackwell take care of it, she's like, it's only blood. And they keep going at it. Girl, ew. So they're just jizzing and splizzing in a bloodstorm, and that's somehow not detracting from the experience. I really hated that. That sounds like it would be a sensory nightmare. Blood is thick and it gets all tacky and smells bad, and I don't know how these two can boink in the middle of all that and still enjoy it. Enjoy your complimentary bloodborne illnesses, you nasty bitches. So get this, you remember how insistent Ophelia was in tracking down who this Gabriel guy is? Well, instead of investigating the contestant log when they had the time, Ophelia got down and then slept like a baby while Blackwell did all the work looking for and labeling all the Gabriels within recent history. And then when she looks through all the names, nothing stands out to her because this woman doesn't actually know anybody that is not her mother or her sister. She's literally just hoping that her stupid magical locket will give her a clue, and when she doesn't, she's like, actually, don't bother looking through this anymore. It's a dead end. What's the use? She shook her head. We should be spending time looking for your key. And even if we did figure out who he was, what would I truly do with the information without Genevieve here? She's the missing piece to this puzzle now. Then why did you make such a big deal about it before? I love how this doesn't occur to her until after Blackwell has had to make a deal with one of the devils to get this information. Also, yeah, you guys should be looking for his anchor, so why the hell did you waste all that time boinking and sleeping instead? And even though she says that, they don't actually do any kind of investigating, and instead, Ophelia spends the entire time complaining about her responsibility to her family, but then she talks about how her mother spent years traveling the world and having adventures before finally tying herself down to the family business, and the same breath talks about how she can't do the same because she has the expectations of 20 generations of grim matriarchs resting on her shoulders. You just explained that it's possible to live your life before taking on the family business and then suddenly walked it back. So what this book is telling me is that Ophelia absolutely could have lived her life the way her sister has and done all the things that she wanted to do with her life before taking on this role, and she just chose not to. So what I'm hearing is that all of her issues are self-inflicted. She literally made it sound like she was trapped in her manor because apparently she doesn't even know a single person outside of her own family. Meanwhile, her own mother and presumably other grim necromancers were able to live fulfilling lives before really committing to this business. And instead of looking for his anchor like she just said they should be doing, she gets drunk while trauma dumping on him and then immediately falls back asleep. Girl, it is day 5 of Phantasma and you haven't found a single thing that you're supposed to be searching for because you decided you wanted to have schmex and then get white girl wasted while you cry about your problems. Well, guess what? You're about to have more if you don't uphold your end of the bargain, you utter dipstick. She wakes up before the 4th trial with a raging headache, and I'm sitting here like, why the hell did Blackwell let her drink so much when he's always going on about how she needs to be prepared for the trials? While they're flirting some more, the atmosphere suddenly gets tense, and Blackwell tells her, don't show any kind of vulnerability before a new devil shows up by the name of Sinclair. Despite his own warning, Blackwell immediately does just that when Sinclair makes some kind of sexual comment about Ophelia, and he uses that against Blackwell now that he knows that he's soft on her. Great job exposing yourself and endangering Ophelia just because your rival made a comment about your crush. Sinclair, who is apparently much more powerful than Blackwell, banishes him and then corners Ophelia to try and convince her to drop out of the competition. She tells him to kick rocks, but then he hits her with, if you know him so well, why don't you ask him about the page he's hiding from you? And then dips. Blackwell busts down the door like it's a Kool-Aid commercial, and then Ophelia is like, hey, show me page 882. When he does, she finds 2 names. One, Gabriel White. This means nothing to her. However, the second name she sees is her own mother's, Tessie Grimm. This part was a little confusing and convoluted. Apparently Gabriel White is her father, but the way it explains how Blackwell knew this is because Gabriel was a specter and could do the same disappearing trick that Ophelia can do. What is a specter exactly? No clue, because they've never even been mentioned up until this point, and aside from the one trick that Ophelia can do, we have no idea what they are or what they're capable of. The other reason he was able to deduce that Gabe was her father is because he also made a blood bargain with Gabriel once and is currently subsisting off of the decade of his life force that he could apparently recognize in her. So apparently people's life forces feel just like their parents and aren't unique to each person. Ophelia has a full-on breakdown because apparently everyone knows everything except for her, and she's experiencing betrayal for like the first time in her entire life. At least that's what I assume, seeing as how she's 23 and apparently never stepped foot outside her home. This is important to the story, but it did mention how Blackwell forced Ophelia to eat before the next trial to keep her strength up. So that is 2 full meals and a bowl of grapes that Ophelia has had in the last 5 days. But she's back to starving herself because by the time she makes it to the dining hall for the next trial, the dinner is almost over. PSA to authors everywhere, please, for the love of God, feed your main characters. You don't have to write every single meal they ever have, but when the main events of your story revolve around dinner time and you consistently make the choice to not feed your character every single time, I'm just going to assume that you're out here glorifying eating disorders. Because what do you mean your main character is supposed to be participating in death trials when she eats on average a single meal every 2 to 3 days? And you cannot tell me that Ophelia does eat off page, because when she's not in the trials, she's looking for the anchor, training her magic, boinking Blackwell, or sleeping. There has been no time to squeeze food in because the events of this book are crammed one after another into a very short amount of time. Anyway, the next trial's theme is gluttony, and this is the clue. A deadly game unfurls upon a twisted board. Watch every step you take or your fate will be untoward. To gain the upper hand, levers are in play, but be careful which you choose. The pendulum swings both ways. Temptations and numbers, don't overcount, forward or backward, a single key to get out. So I did think that this trial was pretty interesting. Contestants have to wear these collars with chains that only allow them to move either forward or backwards, and throughout the challenge, a number of gold bars appear, and if too many contestants advance to try and get them, pendulum blades appear for every extra person who tried to grab the gold. Halfway through the challenge, though, things start to get kind of confusing and convoluted. For some reason, I had a really hard time following along with what was going on. Even though she's super butt mad at Blackwell, Ophelia still summons him because she has 0 critical thinking skills and needs to be told everything by an all-knowing entity who has seen this trial 1,000 times before. And this next part is where the trial completely lost me. Ophelia uses her specter abilities to phase out of the collar around her neck and can now move along the pattern of squares necessary to avoid the pendulum blades. I thought that this was a load of bull because these are magical collars and chains that are in place to force you to only move back and forth, but apparently she can just counteract that magic by disappearing for a second so that it falls off. But the chains literally appeared out of thin air, so what's to stop it from doing it again the moment that she gets out? Why is turning incorporeal for a split second suddenly just cancel out all of that magic? Also, instead of following the path of the pendulum blades herself to figure out where it's safe to move, Blackwell is the one who has to give her directions on which squares to step on. I think it would have been much cooler if she just moved forward or backwards on her own while predicting the trajectory of the pendulums and using her spectre powers if she guesses wrong, than if she had Blackwell literally giving her directions throughout the whole trial. I get that that's the point, that he's supposed to give her an upper hand in the competition, but the stakes in this book are on the floor because Ophelia doesn't actually have to put much effort into anything that she does, and the dangers are minimal because he's holding her hand and healing her when she does get injured. These scenes are supposed to be high stakes and intense and have you on the edge of your seat, but the moment Blackwell shows up, he just hands her everything on a silver platter, which completely eliminates the points of these trials. Sure, Ophelia has a decade of her life on the line, but that was a one-time exchange that has 0 effect on her during the competition. And she does still have the chance to cancel it out if she finds his anchor. It would have been so much cooler if every time she needed his help in a trial, she would have to make a new exchange, like one of her powers or a body part, or even more time of her life each time she called on him. Because if that were the case, it would force her to be self-sufficient and actually try to figure the trials out on her own, with Blackwell standing by as a last resort. I'm not even joking. In this trial, he goes so far as to steady her when she gets off balance, and even rips her dress for her so that she has an easier time moving. He does so much for her in these trials that it's not even exciting. I mean, what's next? Is he gonna wipe her ass for her too? One of the contestants realizes that Ophelia can turn herself invisible, and he also sees Blackwell helping her, and instead of thinking that she's made some kind of deal with the devil to give her an upper hand in the competition, he just assumes that she's a demon and was planted in the trials, which makes no sense, but okay. He tries to attack her, and here's where things get goofy. So she manages to avoid him the first time he lunges at her by stepping to the right or left, because he can only move forward or back. But then it says that the pendulum blade forces her back into his path. Except she can turn incorporeal to avoid the blade, so why didn't she just do that to avoid getting hit? And you can't use the excuse that she doesn't have a good grasp on it or wants to conserve her power, because in her training with Blackwell, it established that she does have a good handle on it, and she can do it multiple times without tiring herself out. She is only done it once before when getting out of the collar. Then Ophelia literally lures this guy into the path of the pendulum and turns invisible just as he rushes her and gets killed. So I don't understand why she was struggling to stay out of his path if she used her power the exact same way, but instead of avoiding him, she uses it to kill him. Again, I want to point out that Ophelia has been super against the idea of killing other contestants and has even tried to help those that were in danger, but suddenly she's perfectly fine with intentionally leading this guy to his death when she could have very easily just used her powers to stay out of his reach and avoid getting harmed by the pendulums. She turned to face Eric fully as he regained his composure and straightened himself up. She backed up a step, directly into the path of the pendulum's downswing. Eric braced himself to lunge. When he leaped forward, too distracted by his rage to realize the trap she had set, Ophelia let him seize her, and when the blade swung back down, he never saw it coming. Then, the very next page, she's suddenly acting like this wasn't something that was done intentionally. "What did I just do?" she whispered. "What do you mean, what did I just do? It says right there, the trap she had set, and Ophelia let him seize her. That implies that everything she just did was on purpose. If this was a matter of him jumping her and she accidentally led him into the path without realizing it, that would be one thing. But it's right there in the text. This was something calculated, so why is she suddenly acting like this wasn't something she chose to do at that moment? Even though the last time that they saw each other, Ophelia was super angry at Blackwell for lying to her, she immediately forgets that he betrayed her by intentionally withholding information because she wants a distraction from the trial. Blackwell, to his credit, is like, "Hey, I don't think this is a good idea. You only want me after you've had a near-death experience, and I don't just want to be a distraction." But then he proceeds to let himself just be a distraction anyway. Ophelia's like, "Fine, I'll distract myself and you can leave." And he's like, "Oh, no, I'm still gonna stay and watch." Brother, what? I feel like that was a pretty reasonable boundary that he tried to set, and Ophelia's reaction to it literally just proved his point, that she only cares about intimacy with him when she doesn't want to think about her own harrowing experiences. But then Blackwell immediately forgets about his own boundary that he tried to set because he's somehow so stigmatized by Ophelia, despite her having 0 brain cells to rub together and the personality of sandpaper. They end up boinking, and during that time, she almost says out loud, "I think maybe I'm falling for you." So remember at the start where Jasper said, "Fall in love at your own risk"? Keep this in mind. Because of this, Ophelia immediately starts acting cold towards him, saying that she's going to look for the anchor by herself and that there is no we. And Blackwell's response to that is, "Girl, you were just begging me to fuck you." And she's like, "I didn't beg." Yes, she urged him on. "Please, don't stop. Please what? I need you," she gasped. "Inside of me." Girl, that is the definition of begging. Who are you kidding? We aren't being careful. Everything that just happened, what was said, consider it the last time. We cannot become attached to each other. I cannot want you like this. You leave for an hour and I'm craving your company. That's not just foolish, it's dangerous. Yeah, so you're actually the one who just summoned him for sex, and I think we all know that you're gonna do it again tomorrow night. Be so for real, Ophelia. I cannot rely on you to save me from everything when in less than 6 days I will never see you again. I don't know, you seem pretty happy enough to rely on him to save you up until this point without thinking much of it. Hypocrite of the year, everyone. So for the second time, she's trying to put a ban on sex between them. Yeah, because that's gonna last. Even though she just said that she was gonna investigate on her own, she doesn't do any investigating. Ophelia just curls up by the names of her parents carved into the wood that she found previously and cries herself to sleep. When she wakes up, Sinclair shows up and tries to appeal to her again by asking her what her greatest fantasy is. And I kid you not, it talks about how her greatest dream was always to explore the French or Italian countryside with her sister, but now when she thinks about her greatest dream, it's her and Blackwell reading together in Grim Manor. Girl, what? She has known this man for 5 days and suddenly she would rather live in domestic bliss with him than go on adventures with her sister, which has always been her lifelong fantasy? Romantasy is never going to beat the allegations of female character domestication. Instead of saying this to Sinclair, she tells him that her greatest fantasy is to go to like a fancy soiree. So he conjures up this grand illusion of a swanky party where they dance for a bit while he explains why he wants to sabotage Blackwell because he's the reason that Sinclair is trapped there. So Phantasma was created by the Prince of Devils, Salem Maestris, who fell in love with a human and was punished by his father, the King of Devils, because he chose her over his duties. Sinclair became trapped with Salem Maestris because he had helped try to hide his lover, and apparently he had a chance to escape from Phantasma, but Blackwell ruined it, so now he wants to sabotage Blackwell. Ophelia refuses Sinclair's offer again, so he abandons her within the illusion, and she starts trying to find an escape, but then some rando asks her to dance, and she instantly abandons all attempts at getting away until Blackwell finds and rescues her. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again, female main characters can't ever be capable, because then what's the point of her love interest if he can't swoop in and save her at every opportunity? I love how Ophelia was just complaining about how she can't keep letting herself rely on Blackwell to save her, and then immediately has to be saved by him in the very next chapter. Genuinely, what is the point of her character? She barely uses her own magic to defend herself. She never applies any kind of critical thinking during the trials or even situations like this with Sinclair. She is just stumbling her way around and needing Blackwell to hold her hand and rescue her throughout the entire story. And on top of all that, she has an awful personality. Blackwell breaks her out of the illusion and we find out that she was trapped in there for several hours and the next trial is about to begin. Sinclair's illusion really made you lose track of time, he said. Dinner has already finished. Once again, Ophelia has not eaten in over 24 hours. So we don't get any riddle for this next trial because Ophelia showed up late, so I know about as much as she does going into it. The devil hosting this trial alludes to having been intimate with Blackwell before, and between her and Jasper mentioning Blackwell kissing previous contestants, Ophelia gets really bitter about the idea of Blackwell being intimate with other people, which is really funny because she actually has hooked up with someone long before she ever met Blackwell. She herself has been with another guy, and Blackwell does know about it. But you know what he doesn't do? Pitch a fit over her having been with another person. He does do the typical, oh, I'll just have to make sure I do better than him thing, but aside from that, he doesn't seem to care that she's had relations outside of him. Ophelia, on the other hand, obsessively thinks about his previous potential partners and how jealous that makes her that he was boinking someone else. So it's okay for her to have had one-night stands because they were unfulfilling and didn't mean anything to her, but suddenly it's a problem when the same goes for him? What a weird double standard. This next trial was probably the most boring one yet. So the theme was wrath, and everyone starts out in like a really tight enclosed space, and they are presented with two options, forfeit or wrath, and when they choose wrath, they have to choose one of the other contestants. Everyone unanimously chose Cade, which was pretty funny because he's the biggest jerk ever, and even his own cronies voted against him. It didn't really go into what would happen if everyone chose different people, but because they all voted the same, they were let out into a larger room with enough pedestals for everyone to escape except for one. So their options are one person forfeits or dies. Since no one volunteers to do that, Cade tries to choke one of the other contestants to death. And at first, Ophelia just stands there and watches until this woman is nearly dead before she actually decides to do anything about it. What I thought was weird is that she'd been training with Blackwell so that she can fire her magic in these smaller, more precise, and easier to direct missiles, but instead of doing that to take him out, she goes invisible and punches him, which is another magical inconsistency because every time she has gone invisible, she's actually become incorporeal, and her body, like, she's not physically there, nothing can touch her, everything just goes through her, she can phase through things. But for some reason, this time when she goes invisible, she is physically present and she is able to punch Cade. Also, I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that she was able to put any power behind that when she's eaten exactly 2 meals in the last week. There is genuinely no way that a woman who has been starving herself this entire book had enough strength to overcome a much larger man who has presumably been eating full meals this entire competition. Immediately, the woman that Cade was trying to kill forfeits, and everyone is able to get up on a pedestal and leave the trial. Like I said, it was really boring. It's super funny because after this trial, it mentions how ravenous Ophelia is, you know, because she hasn't eaten in almost 2 days. But then she proceeds to only eat another handful of grapes. And then while she's eating these grapes, Sinclair shows up and mentions how Blackwell went off with the hot devil lady that he used to bone. The jealousy was back in full force. She set down her grapes. Appetite gone. How has this woman not passed out from starvation? How? Why is this author so insistent on not feeding her characters? I've seen a lot of books where this problem exists, but this is hands down the worst example I've ever seen where the author is going out of their way to intentionally deprive their main character of food, yet experience none of the consequences of starvation. In the 6 days that Ophelia has been here, she's had 2 full meals and 2 instances of eating a few grapes. Yet somehow, she's able to participate in these trials, run around the manor pretending to investigate while not actually putting any real effort into it, and boinking a ghost that she's known for less than a week. And somehow this has had 0 effects on her energy levels or overall health or mental capabilities. Not that she's actually used her brain at any point in this book, but still. Ophelia goes back to her room, and when Blackwell shows up again, she immediately starts blaming him for not coming for her when she tried to summon him while being trapped in Sinclair's illusion. If you really cared about me getting stuck in Sinclair's trick, you would have come one of the 3 times I tried to summon you. Her voice cracked at the last bit, and his expression finally broke, morphing from apathetic to pained. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Where were you?" Hey, remember that very first time that you met Sinclair and he straight up banished Blackwell, who wasn't able to make it back to you until he left? The guy who proved to be even stronger than Blackwell was in that moment. So let me get this straight. You decided to give Blackwell the cold shoulder after using him for sex to distract you from almost dying, refused to let him come with you on your investigation, even though this is something the 2 of you should be doing together, seeing as how you're both searching for his anchor, and this led you to running into Sinclair, then making the decision to hear him out, which led you to getting yourself trapped in his illusion. But sure, this is all Blackwell's fault for not being strong enough to get to you when you're the one who let Sinclair lure you in the first place. I don't think I have ever read a book with a more entitled main character in my life. "I couldn't hear your summons through Sinclair's magic," he told her, head shaking with regret. He's much more powerful than I am." "We're supposed to have a bond," she sniffled. "That's the deal. I call, you come." Hey, you know what else was part of your deal? Looking for his anchor. We are halfway through the competition. The only thing you've managed to find is your parents' names scratched into some wood. This man has been carrying you through the competition, and you have done absolutely nothing for him on your end. But sure, let's whine at him for not being able to reach you the one time you willingly involved yourself with someone you know is more powerful than Blackwell and clearly wants to see you both fail. And then Blackwell ends up apologizing to her, even though he was the one respecting her boundary for space and went looking for her the moment he felt something strange through their bond. Even though none of that was his fault, and he shouldn't have had to apologize to her. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Ophelia is actually the red flag in this relationship, and Blackwell is the one who needs to get out. It is not until after Blackwell spends a full 3 pages waxing poetic about how special she is and how he's been drawn to her since the moment that she stepped into Phantasma that she finally apologizes for being tricked by Sinclair and for getting jealous that he's boned another person before. Though nowhere in that apology mentioned how she treated him coldly and unfairly blaming him for not being strong enough to get to her. But hey, at least it's something. And just like the last time when she said that they need to stop shagging, she just completely walks back her statement. Because Ophelia has the restraint of a slinky. She whimpered with anticipation as he stepped back and undid the belt of his trousers with one hand, flicking open the button with his other. His eyes didn't leave her face as he liberated his cock from beneath its fabric cage. Good grief, this writing is something else. He leaned forward to taste her arousal, and she swore her moan of pleasure could probably be heard across the entire manor. He gave a pleased grunt as he lashed his tongue over her swollen clit and pumped his hardness to the same rhythm of his licks across her sex. I hope this doesn't get me demonetized. Jesus Christ. Thank God for Jasper, because he pops in suddenly and interrupts their bad schmeck scene. So at an earlier time, Blackwell asked Jasper to try and track down information on what happened with Ophelia's parents. We find out that falling in love within Phantasma actually curses the lovers. Ophelia's parents met and fell in love during their time, but then Tessie was cursed to become apathetic towards Gabriel, while Gabriel was cursed to become more and more obsessed with her. They both forfeited the competition, and when Tessie became pregnant with Genevieve, she sought out a demon and made a deal to make Gabriel forget about them. But Phantasma's curse eventually eroded the other demon's magic, and he began to remember Tessie. He joined Phantasma a second time because he wanted to use the bargain to win her back, and this is when he made his bargain with Blackwell. Ophelia starts spiraling and, in her usual fashion, takes her anger out on Blackwell before running away, and when she does, she ends up summoning the Whispering Gate again. She runs into her mother's spirit inside the Whispering Gate, and even though she was just blaming her mother for her and Genevieve coming to Phantasma, they instantly make up and resolve over 2 decades worth of family conflict and resentment that Ophelia has been holding on to in like a single page. I could understand if it was framed in a way of Ophelia still having complicated feelings regarding her mother, but thinking that over time she could learn to forgive her. But the whole interaction literally boils down to her mom being like, you know, dying really opened my eyes and made me realize how hard I was on you. So I want you to forget about the family business and go live your life how you want to and not worry about upholding the family legacy like I originally wanted you to your entire life. As if that is not the reason that both Ophelia and Genevieve are risking their lives in this fucking death house. And suddenly everything was hunky-dory and there were no lingering feelings of resentment for their mother. And it was extra annoying because Ophelia spent her whole visit in the Whispering Gate just dumping onto her mother the events leading up until now. But the moment that she actually tries to focus on the important stuff and ask her about things like, you know, the weird locket that she inherited from her, Tessie starts to fade away. She's like, hey, it's important that you never take it off. And when Ophelia asks why, Tessie's like, oops, time's up, peace. Except she doesn't disappear right away. They literally take a few extra seconds for them to say these like heartfelt goodbyes, and she's like, tell your sister that I love her, and Ophelia's like, I will, I'll see you again, and her mother's like, not too soon though. And I was like, girl, why didn't you just tell her why she can't take the locket off? Like, that sounds like really important information. Who cares about your heartfelt goodbyes? Her life is literally on the line. Why can't she take the locket off? I see being stupid actually runs in the family. When she comes out the other side of the gate, Blackwell is there waiting for her, and after learning everything about her parents, Blackwell is like, you know what? You were right about us needing space because we're playing a dangerous game and this needs to stop before shit hits the fan for us. And Ophelia completely loses her mind. Blackwell explicitly tells her that if she can't complete her end of the bargain, he is going to take her life force, and he doesn't want to do that. And he makes it very clear that he's doing this for her protection. But she throws a great big baby fit and calls him selfish for this. Hey girl, remember when you summoned Blackwell for distraction sex, and when he tried to set a boundary, you immediately dismissed him for not giving you what you wanted? But sure, He's the one who's selfish in this relationship. I love how she has just been flip-flopping between giving in to her own selfish, lustful desires, only to turn around to give Blackwell the cold shoulder. But when he does the same, it is the end of the world. It is betrayal of the highest regard. How very rules for thee, but not for me of her. Sinclair shows up a third time, and because she is super butt mad and trying to prove that she wasn't catching feelings for Blackwell, she lets him finger bang her in the hallway, but it's just not the same. You know, because she clearly does have feelings for Blackwell, otherwise she wouldn't have had a major baby meltdown when he told her that they needed space. This part was really stupid to me, mostly because Sinclair has proven multiple times that he is intent on sabotaging Ophelia, and the last time she humored him, she was trapped in an illusion and was almost disqualified. But as we've previously established, Ophelia is a fucking idiot, and this scene exists only to cause drama between her and Blackwell at a later point. The Six Trials theme is deceit. The clue is a trial of secrets where blood reveals the price. True or false, make sure your choice is wise. A crushing truth, sealed by uncertain fates. False tales won't help, for your blood knows the stakes. So all the contestants have to take turns pricking their fingers, and then a statement about them is presented, and the other players have to guess whether it's true or false. If they get it wrong, they are crushed by a giant pillar. During this trial, everyone finds out that Lucy is in love with Leon, but Leon is not in love with her. They make it through, but because of the curse of Phantasma, he can't touch Lucy without being burned. Because of this, Lucy breaks down and forfeits, because apparently she can't stand to stay if he doesn't love her, which is, in my opinion, kind of gross. The idea of a woman being so heartbroken that she just can't carry on. She just gives up on everything. I don't know. I hate that. I hate it when female characters are so intrinsically tied to the love of a man, or very male-centered, and like her entire downfall is just finding out that he doesn't love her back, and suddenly she loses all the will to continue in this trial for something that she presumably wants that is worth risking her life over. But because Leon doesn't love her back, it's not worth it anymore. I am not calling the author sexist, but that is not a great look. That is not a great trait to be assigning to your female characters. Just my opinion. Ophelia gets back to her room, and Blackwell is there, and he starts pitching a hissy fit because Sinclair and his old booty call gave him the hot goss about Ophelia letting him finger blast her while playing tonsil hockey. I will say that this is the first time I was actually genuinely annoyed by Blackwell, because now he's just pulling an Ophelia and acting like a complete hypocrite baby, when he was the one who tried to put a stop to things and is now acting like he's going to die because another man touched her, even though he knows about like her previous sexual history with another guy, but for some reason it has a really big negative effect on him now. This part was really weird because Lucy was just cursed for being in love with Leon, and even though Blackwell and Ophelia don't say the words "I love you" out loud, they do essentially confirm to each other that they're in love. You are the only thing that's ever made me feel even a semblance of hope in this eternity of hell. The dream I've been looking for, the one to wake me up. The thought of wasting another second when I will lose you forever in only 3 days has ruined me. You are the closest thing I will ever get to experiencing heaven, and I'm not ready to let it go. I need you to know that you are the only person who has ever made me feel like I am capable of anything. The only person who has ever made me feel truly seen. Sinclair's touch meant absolutely nothing. That's why I let it happen. But your touch means fucking everything, and that's why we can't cross that line again. In a different life, in a fair one, I would have kept you until my eternal soul withered away to dust. I don't know, dude. Those sound like pretty obvious declarations of love. I love how it's very clear within this story that people can still very much fall in love, but I guess so long as they don't explicitly say the word love out loud, they are completely safe from the curse. Chapter 42 is literally one sentence. Ophelia stayed in bed until the sorrow in her soul ebbed and the dinner bell chimed. What is this, new moon? Trial 7 is called Violence, and the riddle is: a choice of two tokens, a decision to make. If all only take one, nothing is at stake. If two choose one, and the third takes all, the third will walk, the others will brawl. If two choose all, and the third takes one, the third will be free, the other two are done. Okay, but what if all of them choose to take all? Explain that, atheists. Ophelia summons Blackwell right away, and he cheats by spying on what options the others chose and brings that information back to Ophelia. Cade chose both the coins, while the other contestant only chose one. So Ophelia has to choose between fighting one or the other. She chooses Cade and is like, yeah, he's not leaving this room. And this is what Blackwell says in response. Have I ever told you how much I adore a woman who isn't afraid to get her hands bloody? Ophelia ignored the way his words made her stomach flutter. Yeah, so the last time Ophelia killed someone, she acted really broken up by it and had a whole meltdown over not wanting to give in to her compulsions to kill people. But suddenly she's completely fine with it, and Blackwell is super into the fact that she is down for murder. Sure, Cade is an absolute bastard, and I don't particularly care if he lives or dies, but the flip-flopping with Ophelia's character not wanting to be a killer and then suddenly being okay with it depending on who the person is not exactly a good look for her. Just another inconsistency within the story. But then again, we've also established multiple times that Ophelia is also a hypocrite, so this is entirely unsurprising. So I ended up finding a typo in this book that made me cringe really hard. So it was supposed to say, Cade began to stride toward Ophelia with purpose, interlocking his fingers and pushing them away from his body to crack the joints in his knuckles. But instead of interlocking, it says interlicking, and I was like, his fingers are doing what now? They start duking it out, and at one point Cade ends up ripping Ophelia's locket off of her neck, and all of a sudden her heart begins to slow and nearly stops altogether until she's able to get it back and put it on. And this made me so mad because if the locket was so important that removing it would cause her to die, why didn't her mother say that? Why didn't her mother ever tell her about that? Not just in the Whispering Gate, but in general while preparing her for inheriting the family magic. I feel like that's a very specific and important caveat that should have been mentioned much sooner and very often, seeing as how Ophelia staying alive is crucial to carrying on the family legacy. That's just straight up bad writing. I just know that the author thought that she ate with that little twist, but I don't know what to tell you. It only calls into question the consistency of her writing. Ophelia kills Cade, and she kind of likes the feeling of it. I guess now because she's in her edgy era. When Ophelia gets out of the trial, she's suddenly faced with the physical manifestation of the OCD shadow voice in her head. This is clearly the worst fear thing that Jasper talked about before granting her entry into Phantasma. It tells her that she freed it by giving into its orders and killing someone, but she doesn't want it running free, so she tries to chase it down, despite the fact that she's only eaten a handful of times over the course of the week, while also wearing skirts and a corset. Absolutely not. There is no way that this woman would have been able to successfully fight off Cade as well as chase the Shadow Man down in that scenario. She would be passing out from starvation, fatigue, and the lack of oxygen. This thing starts ripping her to shreds, and she's calling for Blackwell over and over and over, but he isn't coming. And I didn't really get this part because she ends up passing out from the injuries that she sustained from this thing and does not succeed in fighting it off in the slightest. But I guess the point of this whole bit was to just realize that it's okay to ask for help when you need it, because she then wakes up perfectly fine. He's not coming, you bitch, the shadow voice shrieked, and now Ophelia knew it wasn't just angry, it was frightened. He will always come to me, she whispered. We find each other every time, and you cannot stand that because it means I'm no longer alone with you. The shadow voice screamed in fury as it poised itself to land its final blow, and she sucked in all of the air she could manage to whisper Blackwell's name one last time, and then everything went black. Well, that was just stupid. She wakes up and Blackwell tells her that the shadow voice wasn't actually there, and it was just her clawing herself up instead. They start waxing poetic at each other for like a page or two, and then she says this: "Take me back to my room and make me forget everything that just happened." Yeah, so remember that one time Blackwell said that she only wants to boink him after a trial because she needs a distraction and tried to set a boundary about her doing just that? Here she is, once again, explicitly stating that she wants him to distract her from the stuff she's just experienced. I love how Ophelia's go-to for coping with every terrible thing in this book is just schmecks. Girl, that cannot be healthy. They boink yet again for like the millionth time in this book, and at this point it was just really exhausting. The moment they both finish, Ophelia suddenly gets a knock on her door, and miraculously, It's Genevieve. You know, the missing sister that Ophelia came here to search for and has allegedly been worried sick about. Well, just like Ophelia's investigation of the anchor, she does pretty much zero searching, and her sister just somehow knows that she's also there and exactly where to find her. And Ophelia does not find this weird at all. And do you want to know how this heartfelt reunion goes? So Genevieve is essentially like, wow, I can't believe you followed me here and now you're having more fun than me. And Ophelia's reaction to seeing her missing sister that she's allegedly been worrying about is, oh, hi sis. She's literally so blasé about discovering that her sister is actually alive and well, and not emotional about finally finding her after a week here in this dangerous death house. Ophelia clearly does not like her sister, because if that were me, I would be sobbing with relief. Genevieve tells Ophelia about how she found out about their father and Phantasma and their mother's dead. So essentially, Tessie Grimm spent the entire family fortune in order to buy a second home that was warded so Gabriel wouldn't be able to find them. But then Genevieve says that their mother died before she could find out the location of said home. Okay, but if this home was already in Tessie Grimm's possession and the girls were always meant to go there, why was it never mentioned in her will? Now, I have no idea how legal stuff works, but presumably there would have to be some kind of record of documentation about an entire piece of land in Tessie's possession. Even if they couldn't get a lawyer or private investigator to find out this information, I'm assuming this home would require a property tax, which they would eventually find out about when bills for the house start showing up in the mail. Also, why didn't Genevieve just tell her about all of this when their mother died? They both could have gone looking for the deed to this place that presumably resides somewhere in Grimm Manor. Neither of them needed to come here. Ophelia asks how Genevieve managed to make it through the trial without any help, because if you remember, Ophelia has barely been able to wipe her own ass without Blackwell's aid. And get this, she also has their father's specter abilities, except she's known this since she was a child and has been able to harness this power without anyone's guidance. And because of that, she's just been breezing through the trials with just that one ability and no blood bargain from some all-knowing, all-powerful ghost. Meanwhile, Ophelia has specter powers as well as necromantic powers, and she still needs Blackwell to tell her how to make it through the trials and heal her and fight off the haunts. I have never read a book with a more pathetic main character. Like, that is genuinely so embarrassing for her. Genevieve then vows to help Ophelia with her bargain because she doesn't want her losing a decade of her life, which, wonderful, yet another person who will be carrying Ophelia and doing all of the work in this place. Listen, I am all for the main characters who rely on side characters for help and aren't just bad boss babes by default. I do actually want more characters who have to rely on others within the story. But Ophelia has made it through exactly 2 trials by herself without anyone's help. She had all this magic that she didn't know how to use, and instead of trying to figure it out, you know, because it would help her survive, Blackwell had to strong arm her into letting him teach her how to use her own magic to her advantage. Ophelia has been pathetically incapable at best and willfully obstinate at worst. Genevieve ends up being extremely obnoxious and just as insufferable as Ophelia, but instead of her having a terrible personality, Genevieve is literally just a child. At one point, Sinclair shows up and starts talking about their little tryst from the other night, and Genevieve's reaction to this is, oh my god, please tell me that these 2 hunky men are fighting over you. And then also pouting over the fact that no one has made a move on her. Like, I'm sorry, have we just casually forgotten that we've been participating in a series of death games inside a manor haunted with ghosts and ghouls and manifestations of our worst fears? I've gotta say, he's creepy, but in a deliciously hot sort of way, you know? Literally, shut the fuck up. Did the author actually think that this was at all good writing? Like, she does realize that you can still write an optimistic and peppy character without making them so one-dimensional that they end up cracking middle school level jokes in the most inappropriate situations, right? So everything I said about Genevieve helping Ophelia, forget about all of that. After Sinclair's little visit, Ophelia and Blackwell come to the decision that she needs to quit Phantasma because only one person is allowed to enter the 9th level, and it's too dangerous for her to try the 8th trial. So after spending this whole book allegedly searching for her sister, Genevieve is immediately written out of the story after showing up for one chapter. It genuinely felt like the author just did this to resolve the whole missing sister thing as quickly as possible, because Genevieve was never actually important to the story. Her only purpose was to drive Ophelia to Phantasma and subsequently Blackwell. Because this isn't a story about a woman looking for her only living relative and friend. This is a story about two bland characters falling into insta-lust and hooking up after every single major event within the book. So the only clue that they get for trial 8 is choose wisely. Great, so at this point the author didn't even try with this one. Not that she put a whole lot of effort into the previous riddles, because they literally just give you all the details right off the bat anyway. So the theme is fraud, and Ophelia has to choose between two Genevieve's present. Except Genevieve already left, but apparently was re-transported back, except she's not actually there, because Blackwell says that if Ophelia chooses the wrong Genevieve, the real Genevieve, who is outside Phantasma, will die. So she wasn't actually transported back there because she's still in the real world. So wouldn't that mean that technically neither of the Genevieves are the real Genevieve, because the real Genevieve is actually back home? But somehow one of them is still the real Genevieve, even though the real Genevieve isn't in Phantasma, because Blackwell just stated that Genevieve will die in the real world, which means she can't be present here. It also reveals that this is how their mother died, because Gabriel reached this level during the last Phantasma, and their mother died under sudden mysterious circumstances. It turns out that neither of them were Genevieve, and Ophelia figures this out not because of the reasoning I just highlighted, but by touching her stupid little cheat locket and it not reacting to either of them. I just love when the author is too lazy to do any actual work making their characters intelligent or capable, and just gives them overpowered items that do all of the work for them. Also, if neither of them were the real Genevieve, how does choosing one of them kill the real Genevieve? We don't know, because the author doesn't explain how anything works in this book ever. Immediately after she finishes the trial, suddenly Ophelia is like, I have a bone to pick with the Prince of the Devils, and suddenly summons the Whispering Gate at will. For starters, when did we come to the conclusion that we needed to do that? Secondly, Ophelia has only summoned the Whispering Gate twice throughout this book, and each time it was an accident. So how in the world was she suddenly able to harness this power immediately and have it take her exactly where she needs to go? And thirdly, Ophelia doesn't know where the Prince of the Devils is. So how does she suddenly know where the location is via the Whispering Gate? Once again, we are never told this. I'm not joking, this literally came out of nowhere. Genevieve helped them look around the manor, off page of course, because why would the author actually write any kind of investigation? But they didn't find any clues in their search, and Genevieve leaves. And then Ophelia does the 8th trial. Nowhere in that time did it ever establish that Ophelia realizes that what she needs to do is summon the gate to take her to Salamastris. She just fucking does it. I was genuinely so confused in this moment, because at no point did we ever come to this conclusion. She just magically knows what needs to be done. I'm sorry, this is not good storytelling. It's lazy and inconsistent writing, and I'm convinced that the only reason this book got any traction at all was because of its numerous and unnecessary smut scenes. Ophelia gets to the other side and finds out that Salamastris is actually Blackwell, and he's really the Prince of the Devils. Personally, I saw this coming from 100 miles away. We then get a flashback from 500 years ago where Salamastris is storming the gates of hell because he heard that his Boothang was there and wants her back. The King of the Devils admonishes him for falling in love with a mortal and reveals that he knows his true name now because he tortured it out of his lover. What do you mean his father didn't know his true name? Was he not the one who named him? Do devils just come into existence having a secret name that only they know inherently? That's not something that was ever touched upon in this book, so we have no idea. I'm fairly certain the existence of true names that hold power over devils was never mentioned before this point. She was covered in so many bruises and lacerations that there was not a single square inch of unblemished skin on her body. This part actually made me laugh because all I could think about was this girl having a square grid painted painted on her body. Like, this is genuinely the first time in my life I've read a book where instead of saying every inch of a character was covered in injuries, it was every square inch. So that's how you know it was serious. So tell me in the comments, how many square inches do you guys measure? And I'm really curious to know. The king unalives his lover in front of him, whose name is Angel. Do you see where this is going? And then, for some reason, after revealing that he plans to tether Salamastris to Phantasma, where he'll lose all of his memories, he's suddenly like, but don't worry, I'll give you a little loophole so that you might one day be free. Why though? This guy is literally trying to give his son eternal punishment, but suddenly he's like, but don't worry, I'll make it so that there's actually a good chance that everything works out for you. And then his dad agrees that if he manages to find the heart and key and free himself, then every soul who has learned his true name will forget it. Yeah, because that makes so much sense. I'm mad at my son for turning against me, and after going through all the trouble to learn his true name and have complete control over him, I'm going to not only personally create a stipulation where he can escape the punishment that I've set for him, but also agree to giving up all the power I have over him if he succeeds. Remember guys, this is supposed to be the king of devils. This is supposed to be a being who has lived for several millennia, and one would assume is meant to be very clever. Yet for some reason, he's willingly making terrible deals with his kid who he is trying to punish for eternity. But okay, sure. Also, remember how Phantasma was just meant to be a rumor that Ophelia didn't believe in? Well, apparently it's been doing this for 500 years, and it jumps from one place to the next quite literally within 1 or 2 days after its previous series of trials. Each time, dozens and dozens of contestants enter it, and the majority of them end up quitting, and there's zero rules set in place to keep people from talking about it publicly, and people can even enter multiple times to try and win again. Yet somehow, the main character thought that it was just a hoax, despite it seemingly being a very well-known event that has been taking place every 2 weeks for half a fucking millennium. Wouldn't there be some kind of pushback throughout like every world government if a haunted murder house was popping up around random cities and countries for like 5 centuries, killing and cursing its contestants? Where are the religious extremists who would be calling for this thing to be exorcised? I refuse to believe that something this well documented would not have started like some kind of rise in devil hunting organizations. How is there not a single Van Helsing looking ass bitch out there trying to vanquish this demonic murder house? This book has more holes than Swiss fucking cheese. Immediately after sending Blackwell off to Phantasma, the King of the Devils then creates the locket that was passed down the Grimm family line and actually debates with his servants on who he should choose as the reincarnation of Blackwell's lover that he just deleted. All that's left is to choose who will receive the mortal soul and when it shall be released. The soul needs to be reborn to someone who will not balk at a place such as Phantasma, but will have a healthy dose of apprehension in regards to it. We cannot make the game too easy for Salamastris after all. Here's a question. Why make this a game at all? I thought this was meant to be a punishment. And how long should I assure the necklace be worn before the soul is released and reborn? The king considered for a moment. Let's give him 5 centuries. Make sure my magic has time to make him really forget her. Too much sooner and he might still be able to recognize her soul. Make sure whoever you compel to wear the necklace will never take it off until it is passed to the next host, and so on. So the King of the Devils literally gave him everything he needed to escape on a silver fucking platter in the hopes that what? He would fail anyway? Despite literally setting him up for success in every way possible.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Also, if his true name is Blackwell and that's the one that can be used to compel him the same way his father was able to control him, how come no one else could do it throughout the book before? There were multiple times Ophelia tried to get him to do stuff while exclusively using his true name, and he was like, no can do, baby cakes. But like I've said 100 times before, this story is riddled with inconsistencies and provides zero explanations for anything at all. Blackwell remembers himself in this moment, but he can't grant Ophelia's wish because that's only allowed if she's the final contestant. And because this goofy bitch immediately went looking for him before finishing the final trial and eliminating the rest of the contestants, the best he can do is cut their blood bargain by 5 years and send her back home. Suddenly, Ophelia, despite never being able to rub 2 brain cells together, realizes that her locket is the heart that Blackwell needs, and I guess the key was just for her to openly admit she's in love with him, because then it opens. Blackwell is set free because she gave up her locket, and Ophelia's heart begins to stop. But that's okay, because he's immediately able to heal her heart as her reward for freeing freeing him, so all those dramatics were for nothing. Even though he saved her from dying, there's still the matter of the curse for admitting that she's in love with him. Except they're then able to instantly solve that issue by just making her his new tether, so not only will that break his father's curse, but she also gets to live forever with him because their life forces will be tied together. And she agrees to this without any kind of thought as to the consequences of immortality. That's it. Phantasma crumbles, and Blackwell is able to use his magic to get rid of their mother's debt and keep Grimm Manor, and they all live happily ever after. Whatever happened to their father Gabriel, who was obsessively searching for them, or the second home that Tessie Grimm spent their entire fortune to ward against said obsessive father? That is never explained because apparently it wasn't actually that important to the story. Like, sure, Tessie died because Gabriel failed the 8th trial, but he still fucking remembers the fact that he has 2 children. I love how these were presented as some kind of major plot point and then fell off the face of the earth. Where is this hidden home that put your family into debt? I want to know. This book was almost as bad as Blood of Hercules. The only positive thing I can say about this book is that at the very least, Blackwell wasn't some kind of problematic creep whose red flag behaviors were romanticized within the narrative. But he was super boring at the same time. The only likable thing about his character is that he values consent, which is the bare minimum in a love interest. And I hate that the author used the whole reincarnated lover thing to excuse the fact that these two barely had any personality or believable chemistry. Also, the fact that he was calling her by the name of his dead lover throughout the entire book and then continues to call her that after the events of Phantasma is really fucking weird. I would genuinely be so skeeved if Soren referred to me as a past reincarnation that he was in love with. Like, hey dude, I'm not that person, and the fact that you call me that as a cute pet name kind of makes it look like I'm just a stand-in for your original true love, but okay. Anyway, I'm done talking about this book. This video is too long as it is. I'm not gonna go over all my big criticisms because I've already screamed about them a dozen times at this point. This entire video is the criticism. Normally, I would pull a few bonding over books cards, but like I said, I'm tired of talking about this book, and this video is already too fucking long. It was shit. That's my closing statement. Yes, I'm recording this on a 3rd day. Do not come for me. So today's indie spotlight is Divine Chaos, Forsaken Herald of Ruin by Cecily Goodwin. Divine Chaos is a dark celestial fantasy story featuring angels, demons, and a Nephilim who is exiled because of her very nature. Born of an act that should never have occurred, Oriel exists as living heresy. Hunted by those who fear what she represents and protected by forces that barely tolerate her survival, she walks the realms as a contradiction that should not be allowed to breathe. Haunted by her memories and burdened by the truth of what she is, Oriel must decide whether she will defend the very beings who cast her aside or rise above them and claim a power no one was meant to wield. Divine Chaos is a sweeping tale of forbidden love, cosmic war, and the power of embracing one's contradictions. In a world built on chains and sacrifice, Oriel's defiance may be the only hope for peace or the spark that ignites the end of all things. Readers can find this book on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited, as well as order a signed copy from the author's Etsy shop. Both links I will be posting in the video description. And if this sounds like it's up your alley, go ahead and click that link and give this author some love and support. Thank you so much to Cecily Goodwin for submitting your book to me. If you or someone that you know is an indie author who would like to get their books out, on my page there is a link to a Google form where you can fill out just a couple questions about your book and submit to have your book featured in one of my future deep dives. And that's all that I have for today's video. If you made it all the way through, leave a ghost emoji in the comments. Thank you so much for coming with me on this awful journey. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like and subscribe button as it helps my channel grow. And the more my channel grows, the more I get to read awful books such as this, because apparently I love to torture myself for online validation and money. I hope you guys tune in for the next video, but until then, make sure to take care of yourselves, and as always, remember to keep it real.